think we might get started. If you'd like to stand, if you're able. Acknowledgement of country, diversity, commitment, service acknowledgement and prayer. The City of Victor Harbor acknowledges the Ramangeri traditional custodians of the lands and we acknowledge their deep connection. Pay our respect to elders. This respect is extended to Aboriginal Australia, First Nations.
City of Victor Harbor is committed to diversity, equity and inclusion. We respect people of all ages, abilities, genders, sexualities, religions, cultures, beliefs and backgrounds.
We recognise the brave individuals who have served and continue to serve our nation. Remember those who have lost their lives and paid the ultimate sacrifice to our country.
Almighty God, we ask you to bless this council and allow it to be an agent of change to the people of the city and beyond. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the honouring of your name and the welfare of the people whom it serves. Amen.
Please be seated. I'd like to welcome all the people in the gallery tonight. We've got a big gallery, and can I just please remind you that you are a gallery, not an audience. So if you can please not respond to any motions or anything that go through. It's really important that myself and the elected members are able to concentrate, and so we'd really appreciate that from you. I'd also like to thank those that are watching the live streaming from home. It's a wild and woolly night out there, so I guess that there's quite a lot of people that are snuggled up in front of their computer screens at home watching us as well. And finally, I'd like to do a big sing out to our volunteers. The council had a volunteer appreciation evening during the week, and we talked and said thank you very much to over 400 council volunteers. So if any of you are volunteers for the council, if any of the volunteers are listening at home, once again, a very big thank you.
Sorry, Mayor, I'd like to call a point of order just regarding a sign in the chamber regarding misogyny. I find it highly offensive, and considering that we are men in this chamber, I think that shouldn't be in this chamber.
I'll ask actually the people that do have signs, please put your signs down. It is distracting for elected members, and it's probably not appropriate in the gallery. So if you don't mind, all of you putting your signs down, even if they haven't got anything about misogyny on them, they can be distracted. Thank you. If we go, there are no items adjourned or lying on the table. So if we go to the minutes of the previous meeting, the recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council of the 27th of November be confirmed as true and accurate. Do I have somebody to move that way? Thank you, Angela. And a seconder, Stuart. Do either of you want to speak to those minutes? Does anybody want to speak to those minutes or have any questions? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We do have a deputation tonight, Mr. Keith Klimpson and Mr. Peter Watts. Keith, are you in the room? You are? Would you like to come forward, Pete? I see Peter's not with you. Oh, you are there, Peter. Hello. If the two of you would like to come up at the back, and perhaps Councillor Kemp, can you show Keith and Peter how to use the microphone? You have 10 minutes to speak, and that includes question time. And we've got quite a full agenda tonight, so I will be quite strict with the 10 minutes. But please go ahead.
Right, thank you, Moira. As you know, this deputation is about improving beach usage, specifically, well, for everyone, but quite specifically for disabled people. Now, I've been told I can't talk about expiation notices, but Peter's here and I hope he can tell you a little bit about the hurt and the suffering he's experienced with a lot of the confusion and for the problems he is facing just being able to walk his dog on the beach. So without talking about these expiation notices, I'd like to ask Peter if he can do that.
Good evening.
That's absolutely true, Mr. Clemson. It's not appropriate for you to talk about any expiation notices, but we're more than happy to hear from your perspective in relation to beach access for people with disabilities and their dogs.
Maybe before Peter speaks, I was in the company of a lady this evening who is registered blind, yet she's dependent on walking along Encounter Bay Beach. I'd just like to say a few words on her behalf. She's registered blind, and as you know, the amount of seaweed on Encounter Bay Beach is just unreal at times. And there are many occasions when she can't walk along the beach. Now, walking her two dogs, she's just dependent on Encounter Bay Beach because she has to cross over the pedestrian crossing by the hospital. So until business of seaweed on the beaches is addressed, often she can't exercise her dogs. And you know, as you know, I've emailed you many times about the business of seaweed, and you've said it requires a development application. And then that raises the question of, if it requires a development application, what right have you got to be making bylaws that involve beach usage? I have been told it's Crown land. So if the Crown won't let you remove the seaweed, have you got any right to make bylaws relating to beach usage? But maybe Peter can say a few words on how he's felt.
I'll just respond to your questions about the seaweed. We are not by law allowed to remove the seaweed. I think I've let you know that before. It's a state government, the beach is state government, it's due. So it belongs to Dew, and the Environmental Protection Authority does not allow us to remove the seaweed. Today's deputation is about dogs on beaches,
Yes.
and I'm more than happy to hear from yourself and Peter about that.
Yes, and that was how to improve in beach usage was about just one little aspect. It was about the seaweed and how it's preventing a semi-blind lady from using the beach. But please, I'll pass on to Peter now.
Good evening. Yes, as we are aware, there's very limited access to the beach for myself. The NDIS provided me with a 4-wheel drive gopher so that I can go to the beach. And part of my plan to help to improve my ability to walk is to be allowed to walk on the beach. I go with my dogs every day to the beach. I walk around the estuary because the area is flat. It's very hard to walk on a beach with a slope when you've got foot drop. So therefore I walk around the estuary area because it is the majority of the time flat with walking sticks, and I go down there with my dogs. That's all a part of the plan that's been put forward through the NDIS to help with my mental health, to help with me continue to want to be on this planet. I would like to think that I can do that without the ridiculous laws, the ridiculous paperwork that's been sent to me that won't allow me to let my dog off his lead on the beach or anywhere in Victor Harbour, anywhere, inclusive of the dog park, because it is a public area. I think it may need to be revisited. It's ridiculous. It won't allow me to do what I need to do to make myself better. I haven't walked now since I was sent that notice. This disease that I have is a disease where the less you do, the less you'll be able to do. So I basically walk every day to continue to allow myself to walk. I haven't been able to walk for probably 2 weeks. I'll probably be lucky if I can walk. So it's affected my life massively, and I'm depressed to buggery, and I'm very deflated about actually living in Victor Harbour now. I've been coming here since I was 5 years old. My grandparents have lived here for a long, long time. My mum and dad live here, a cousin lives here, and my sister lives here. And I built my house, which is purpose built for myself. I would, if I could afford to, I would bugger off, sell up and go, but I can't afford to do it again. So I just ask that maybe the Rawlings could be revisited and the areas where I need to walk may be allowed. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Peter. We will be revisiting the dog bylaws tonight as part of tonight's agenda. So there will be discussion amongst the elected members in relation to that. Got a question, Councillor Corimbo?
I do, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Pete, and thank you both for coming down. I went over and listened to you along with Councillor Kemp and Councillor Burns with that committee. I guess my question is, you mentioned a reduction in mental health.
Yes.
I've actually seen you on the beach, and off the beach now, because you're not on the, you don't take your dog down there. And it's not just your mental health that's suffering, it's actually Baz the dog's mental health that's suffering as well, which is quite disappointing. And it's actually very evident that he's not happy. I guess my question is, for a council that preaches to be inclusive and diverse and everything else, do you feel like you're being currently excluded because of these potential changes to the bylaws?
Definitely.
Yep. And one other question I have for you, and I think I asked you this over there, would you consider running for council in 3 years' time?
I think I would, yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we please keep the questions relevant to the actual deputation? Are there any further questions, Councillor Burns?
Thank you both for your comments. Appreciate it. I just wanted to confirm, I think it got mentioned at the forum before here, council has obviously gone out and sought feedback from the community. I think that over 200 people have responded, which is excellent. I understand that there was a petition which has been tabled with council, which we haven't seen yet. A further 490 people, am I correct, were talking about the bylaws and not wanting them changed or had concerns. Maybe you can explain a bit. My other question was just clarification, probably to the CEO. Was that correct that the beaches are owned by the Environment Department, not by council? Is it up to the waterline, high water mark, or I'm not quite sure?
That's due. So Department of Environment and Water look after the beaches.
Is council boundary the high water mark?
Sorry, yes it is. So council has care and control of the foreshores, hence we have bylaws which enable the council to put those provisions in place around access onto the beach and activities on the beach. But in terms of the gentleman that raised the question before in regards to seaweed, that's an Environment Protection Authority requirement. We can't remove seaweed without seeking permission. Even in significant storms, we need to seek permission. It's around retaining and protecting the dunes. But again, there's many things we can take on board and have a look at in terms of improving the access of our beaches, but unfortunately most of it is protected. But yes, that's why under council's Crown land, under our care and control, enables the council to enact its bylaws upon those lands.
We have
So-
one minute, time for one more question.
So if council are issuing fines, does that money go to the environment?
No, so council's bylaws, in terms of any expiation that's issued, it's council that actually takes on those fines.
Angela, you had your hand up before. Did you have a question?
Question both for Peter and for council. With regard to the actual ramp that you're walking down, once you get to the bottom of that ramp, is that in the estuary zone? And is there any reason why once you get down there that you could go to the right rather than to the left?
The ramp is the ramp at the end of Bridge Terrace,
Yes.
and it goes down onto the beach.
So is that in the estuary
No,
zone?
no.
And how much room is between the ramp and the yacht club for beach access?
There's probably 400 metres of beach between the Inman River outlet in the estuary, and then probably 500 or 600 metres between the yacht club and that ramp.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. You may want to stay. I know that in the next couple of agenda items we'll be discussing the bylaws, and you might be interested in that. But thank you very much for taking the time to come out on such a wild and woolly night to talk to us. And I look forward to seeing you on the beach. I think I see you on the beach with my dogs every Sunday, so I look forward to catching up again as soon as the weather improves.
Thank you.
They've been reluctant to come out this one.
They came out on Sunday for a brief visit. Anyway, thank you. We now will move, there's no questions from the gallery and there are no petitions. We now move to item 9, which is the outstanding resolutions. Recommendation is that council receive and note the outstanding resolutions report for December. Would somebody like to move that? Thank you, Stuart. And somebody seconding that? Thank you, Marilyn. Do either of you want to speak to that or have any questions? No? Does anybody have any questions? Oh,
Sorry.
Stuart, you
Yeah.
do, sorry.
Just to say thank you for making the resolutions better format. It's much easier. Thank you.
Councillor Kemp, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I have a question which is on page 13 of the agenda. It refers to the 23rd of October, a motion without notice from, Councillor Angela Schiller concerning South Coast Television Workshop. I just wondered if the CEO could provide an explanation about whether that workshop will be closed or open.
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. Yes, based on some discussions that we have had outside of the council chamber, I have, as you have yourself, reviewed section 90 of the Local Government Act. Even though it is a briefing or a workshop of the chamber, it needs to be in line with those provisions, and there really are no areas under the provisions of section 90 that would enable that session to be closed. So I would, even though the council has resolved to have it closed, I can't close it. It would need to be open because there are no real reasons under section 90. And that will be scheduled for the 10th of January.
Are there any further questions in relation to the outstanding resolutions? If not, I'll put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, we come to 9.2, which is our bylaws. I'll be doing these recommendations, and there are 10 of them, one by one. The first recommendation is that council receive and note the community engagement application of bylaws report, which is on attachment A. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller, and seconded Councillor Henderson. Anyone want to speak to that? Those in favour? Those against? That's carried. The bylaw, so recommendation 2, bylaw 3 relates to roads. And I note that that decision retains the status quo. Would someone like to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Burns. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Bylaw 4, which relates to local government land. And I'll ask you to note that that recommendation retains the status quo with the exception of clause 5.8.1. Which the clause applies to any building or part of any building on local government land. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Quinton, and seconded Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? It's carried, thank you. Recommendation 4 is also retaining the status quo, and it's also about local government land. I'm not going to read that all out in its entirety. Take it as read. All those in favour? Someone move that way. Thank you, Councillor Burns, and seconded Councillor Schiller. Either of you want to speak to that?
No, I've read it through in detail, the full bylaws. I'm happy with it.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Recommendation 5. I'll take that one as read. Council, pursuant to the Local Government Act and clause 11, once again around local government land. No location's been identified and it shall apply to all local government lands subjected to the Road Traffic Act. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Burns. Any questions from anybody? I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Now we come to the bylaws that I think people are interested in, the dog bylaws. So number 6 is that Council resolve, the recommendation Council resolve that no location has been identified for a dog-free area at clause 4.1 and that this decision retains the status quo. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And seconding that? Thank you, Councillor Mann. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
I'll be voting against it. I actually think that we should have dog-free areas within Victor Harbour. Outside of the dog park, I think we should have some designated areas where dogs can actually run and you know, to fully exercise a dog, walking a dog doesn't really exercise, it needs to run.
Sorry.
Realise it's dog-free areas, not dog off-leash areas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Resolve that no location has been identified for a dog-free area.
Yes.
Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, I won't be supporting this one as well because I feel again that surely within our council area we can have dog-free areas. It's not that hard, I would imagine, with the vacant land that is available. Doesn't mean it will be permanently forever because that land gets developed and we, you know, things don't become dog-free anymore. But I'm just wondering, is there land available that we could allocate as dog-free?
So I'm just wanting to clarify, this is so that it's dog-free as in dogs are not allowed to be there. A dog-free area, not dogs be free.
Not dogs
free.
Like no dogs allowed. Okay. Are there any more comments? Do people understand the recommendation? All those in favour? Those against? Councillor Quinton? dog-free area. So no location has been identified for a dog-free area. So an area, dogs are allowed everywhere.
Dogs are allowed everywhere. There isn't anywhere we say dogs are not allowed at all. There is nowhere that occurs. That's status quo.
Got it?
I'm not going to be happy at the moment.
All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Number 7, that pursuant to these bylaws, dogs on leash areas 24/7 will be Soldiers Memorial Reserve, Soldiers Memorial Gardens, Warland Reserve, along the foreshore areas adjacent to Encounter Lakes and Franklin Island Lakes. So that's John Simmons Park, CM Thorpe Park and John Crompton Reserve, Petrel Cove. And noting again that this decision retains the status quo because that's what is happening now. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded, Councillor Kemp. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I believe that, yes, we must retain this because these areas are very populated and you can't have dogs running around off lead. So I think we need to have some control around dogs in these areas due to the population, children, where playgrounds are nearby, etc., etc. So I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. And it's Councillor Schiller?
Query about actual streets like Ocean Street and so forth. Are they covered in some other manner?
I'll ask Director Pathouse about that. Oh, Dustin is here. Would you be able to respond to that, Dustin? Can you repeat your question, Angela, please?
With regard to the Ocean Street and just the city precinct where most people would be large pedestrian population, it does, is there a part of the Act that makes that on lead 24/7?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Schiller, through the Mayor. Currently, it's not listed as a requirement for a dog on leash 24/7 on Ocean Street. The areas listed were just matching the previous areas that we had within our bylaws. So the density, of course, of Ocean Street is something that would be questioned, but still the dog's under effective control, and we believe that our community does enough to warrant responsible dog ownership to not restrict that further to Ocean Street. However, that's up to members to include or adapt the resolution if they would see fit.
Thank you, Dustin. If Angela or members, if you want to add within the city centre to that, or Dustin may be able to have some wording that might be of assistance if you think that dogs need to be on leash 24/7 in, for example, Railway Terrace, Ocean Street, around the city centre. We can vary that motion or you can amend that motion to include that.
I wouldn't mind if you don't think it's going to open the can of worms, and we could get some very specific roads in that motion. But if it's going to complicate things at this point in time, and I should have addressed it earlier, I'm happy to be led by administration.
Sure. The other, I've just, Director Rokoczynski suggested that the community consultation that went out before didn't address these specifics. And if we want to change this and address different specifics, it may be worthwhile going back out to the community about that. Putting these bylaws in, or there's no really change to the bylaws, doing that now, and then later on talking to the community about increasing. Dustin?
Through the Mayor, it's also important to note that this round of bylaws is a little bit different to what we had previously. The resolutions that you're forming an opinion on today, they can be altered by resolution of council. So if it does get to the stage where we feel that we need to adapt a bylaw, we don't need to change the whole bylaws, go through a full consultation and gazettal process. We can actually amend that through resolution by council. So maybe down the track, if that's something that we feel that would be warrant discussion, we can attend that under separate report, might be the best option.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I'm happy with the explanation.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Thank you, Dustin. You might want to stay there in case there's any other questions. Does anybody else have any other questions in relation to recommendation 7? Councillor Burns?
I understand the need for dogs on leash areas and I support that. I just have a problem with 24/7. I understand the areas proposed. I understand it's existing, but I just think that I much prefer that it had nominated times rather than 24/7.
Thank you. Any further comments? I'll put that to the floor now. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Dustin. Number 8, council resolve the following as new dogs on leash areas 24/7. The Hindmarsh River Estuary, the Inman River Estuary and Wright Island. Would somebody like to move that? Thank you, Councillor Quinton. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Quinton?
So obviously this topic's been had a lot of debate on it and a lot of community involvement. However, I do support this motion. We have to go back to why this has been created, and ultimately we share the beach with all of the native fauna that's there and the nesting shorebirds, and this bylaw has been made to ultimately protect that natural biodiversity. So I think it's important we continue to support that. We can see from the bylaws that there are lots of available beach space for off-leash dog exercise, which is also really important. And it's important to also note that the off-leash exercise the dog has to be under effective control, and that's really the crux of it. So yes, I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Councillor Henderson, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, just to say that I agree. I think it's very important that we protect the beach nesting birds, which are vulnerable and endangered, particularly in these areas that are listed here. I've also looked at all of the community feedback, and a lot of our community are very much in favour of this bylaw.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Burns and then Councillor Karemba.
I won't be voting for it. I have also had a look at the community feedback, and the overwhelming support is that the community are against further restrictions, and it's more about a balance with the estuary area. And I understand, but I think it's just going too far. I think we can get a better solution.
Thank you, Councillor Karemba.
Thank you. I will be vehemently voting against this, and I do take in consideration the comments by the other councillors about biodiversity. My concern is that it starts with this area, then it moves to another section, then it moves to another section. The next thing you know, we're passing motions that want every dog muzzled the whole time. I'm vehemently against this. This is just a massive encroachment on what is a large portion of our community. I think there's 3,100 and something registered dog owners, and I can only surmise, going by the 490 people that were voted against or signed the petition, plus the 200 that compensated, said they do not want this. If we are not prepared to listen to our community, then I ask the chamber, what are we doing here? What boroughs are we pushing? Because it seems to me that the majority of the community have spoken and a minority seem to be very, very vocal, and we keep supporting these decisions. So I'll be voting 100% against this. And just to answer one of Councillor Sheila's questions, the reason that the gentleman in the wheelchair asked for this section of beach to be left is because he cannot walk on the rest of the beach because of the angle of the beach. So yes, there is a lot of beach to the left or to the right of the ramp, but this section of beach, he can actually use. So if we're going to start precluding people who are disabled in our community, then I really question what we're doing in this chamber. Thank you.
Can I just ask Dustin a question about that? When I've looked at the maps in relation to what parts of the estuary would be excluded from dogs, it seems to me that the beach in the estuary, so when the tide's out, there's the beach, is still included. It's the greenery and it's the green bits, for want of a better word, that we're saying in this that will be dogs on leash areas. So it's the plant and the bird nesting areas, but the beach part in front of the estuary is still open for dogs off leash if they're in effective control during the appropriate times. Can you just highlight what areas we're talking about?
Of course, thank you. Back through the Mayor, I'm guessing, responding to your own question. Firstly, it's important to recognise that the Chamber voted on our biodiversity and natural asset management plan, and in that plan it contained objectives and actions. As part of that plan, one of the actions was about protecting our beach nesting birds and our high biodiverse areas. So whilst there's been a bit of misconception in the community that this was just pulled from thin air, everything that we've done in recommending these changes is only to further support the documents the Chamber has approved. This particular area does not include the foreshore, so the sand leading up to the open of the inlet. So where Mr. Watts, I have been on the beach with him having discussions about the areas he can walk, it does only restrict the dog is on lead when he is within the estuary, which is in the dune area or the heavily vegetated area. Mr. Watts has, in his situation, he definitely needs a flat, firmer ground, and on the foreshore that is still available, that does not restrict Mr. Watts leaving the ramp. He can still have his dog under effective control, just not within the dune area.
Thank you. So just making it clear, it's within that dune area and the estuary area. Councillor Kemp, you want to speak, and then Councillor Crember, if you've got a question, as you've already spoken.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I think if I move a small amendment to the area, because we're talking about the sand dune area where our walking trails is, where people can ride bikes, walk through, because you don't want dogs running around over the off track and going everywhere like that. You don't want people walking around off the tracks as well. So that's the idea, to maintain the biodiversity for our quite a few large species of animals, birds, lizards, all sorts of things that live in that biodiversity. So if I move an amendment that we include the Hindmarsh River estuary sand dunes, because that distinction says the sand dunes, because once the water or the river or low tide, you've got the beach that runs around. So when you talk about the estuary, that's part of the estuary, is the mouth of the river. So I think if we put in my amendments would be Hindmarsh River estuary sand dunes and Inman River estuary sand dunes. That's my amendment.
Do I have somebody happy to second that? Second that, Councillor Quinton. Any discussion on the amendment?
I really feel like we need, and I've raised this privately through the council member request email, but we need better maps of the actual, it's very confusing. And I think that's why there's all this misconception in the community, is that the maps that were provided initially were not accurate and very difficult to interpret. So I feel like, especially with Councillor Kemp's amendment, we can keep everyone happy and still keep these, get these through.
Yep, and I'd agree with you. I think there was some confusing communications right at the beginning, but hopefully this will make it clear. So the amendment is that it now reads Hindmarsh River Estuary Sand Dunes, Inman River Estuary Sand Dunes. You all happy with that? All those in favour? This is to the amendment. Those against the amendment? That's carried. We now go back to the original motion. Does anybody else have anything to say about the original motion? You've got a question, Councillor Karemba?
Yes, I'd just like to know moving forward how we are actually clearly going to define the sand dunes. Is it with, GPS coordinates? Is there going to be flags? Because this whole thing seems very confusing. I would almost put forward a motion that we actually
Councillor Karemba, what's your question? How
are we going to identify clearly so that people don't get fined? Yep. That's my first
Dustin,
question.
how would you identify the sand dune area?
Great question, Councillor Karemba, and through the Mayor. as part of the resolutions out of this report, we'll be putting another report to council for a bid for signage, depending on the changes that happen across our community. We understand that historically there's a number of signs within our community. Some even have Roman numerals still on them. Part of the plan of what we're doing in the bylaws will include funding for further signage. So I would actually see that envisaged that we have clear maps and also signboards upon entering our foreshore so that it's very clear. It's important to understand that our officers operate under council's enforcement policy. So everything we do in the first instance is about educating and not hitting people with a big stick straight away. So we presume with any change in process, especially bylaw, there will be some period of consultation and education with our community to really get this right. But clear signage is probably the easiest, Mark.
Thank you for that. It's just been pointed out to me that Councillor Quinton, you moved the original motion, so you're unable to move the amendment in terms of meeting procedures. Second the amendment. Can I have somebody else who's able to move that amendment? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. I need to put the amendment again. All those in favour of the amendment? Yep, it's the same amendment. Yep. Those against? Yep, thank you very much. Are there any more questions or discussion in relation to the recommendation? Councillor Corembo, you've got a question. You've already had.
Yeah, I do. Will we be putting in these signs prior to potentially handing out any enforcement notices? Because I think it's probably only right that we do so.
Through the Mayor. Again, it will be a process that we undertake. As with any change, our approach is going to be in line with our enforcement policy. And we believe that once we've provided that education individually to someone, if there has been a breach of the bylaw, that if there were further breach, then we would take action in accordance with our enforcement policy. Clear signage is one very good tool, but also a self-education and understanding, and hopefully the communication we have coming out moving forward will really make this clearer, and we can support our community in succeeding in the change.
Councillor Burns, you have a question?
Thank you. Just a quick question. When do you envisage that you will be providing elected members with the cost and time frame to change the signage? Because I would like it as soon as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Burns, and through the Mayor. We have flagged at this stage, depending on the changes that come from the bylaws, given the time of year, that already work has gone into reviewing existing signage. So now it will be based on the resolutions out of this evening's meeting. We could move forward with a proposal, hopefully by the end of January, and put something to council as soon as possible. Because we need to also consider existing signage and make sure that we undertake this holistically. It's not able to be achieved just in a one location, one size fits all. We really want to make sure that our entire foreshore sings the same tune so that we're all on the same page with our visitors.
But if we pass this evening, in that interim period, can we have a grace period where you're not going to get fined whilst we amend?
Through the Mayor, I believe everything that we do is about education with our community. It is only in repeat circumstances or where there is a serious offence that we'll need to follow action further with our enforcement policy. If the council, I don't know how it would work to put a stay on enforcement, but I can assure you that the message to our officers is that our education, especially with a change like this, needs to be paramount, and we need to be visible to make sure that we can respond to concerns.
One more question, Councillor Corembo.
Thank you. This is a question for the CEO, just regarding this whole situation. I just would like to know, and I think probably a lot of people in the gallery would like to know, considering that it created such an uproar, who suggested Petrel Cove as a dog off-leash beach?
I can answer that one, Councillor Corembo. I did. I put it to the...
Thank you.
No, I'll fully answer the question, and I'd appreciate the gallery not laughing at me when I'm answering a question. It's just, I was asked by a member of the community what I thought of Petrel Cove being an off-leash beach, and I said, that's great if you can get down there. What do people think? Some people thought it was great. Some people thought that it wasn't good. And then listening to the comments, I agreed that in the end it probably wasn't very good because it's quite a dangerous beach, and if dogs get in the water and get into trouble, then people will get into trouble. And it's also a beach that a lot of the community can't actually access. So it was a question that was put out there by me in response to what some community members were saying. We got a lot more responses, and in the end I thought, no, I think the community's right. And I do think, Councillor Coimbra, that as councillors, that's our job, to put things out there, to listen to what the community say, and then to change our minds or to go ahead with something. And I'll continue to do that. I gather there's no more questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mann.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I guess considering all the different views around the chamber, and as we've seen in the report, there's been extensive consultation from the community on this very passionate issue that many people are very passionate about, and that consultation is very much appreciated in making these decisions in the chamber. And like any decision we have to make, it's balancing often competing thoughts, competing ideas and competing views. And I guess what's come through, despite I think some elected members saying there's overwhelming support for this proposal and then others saying there's overwhelming support against this proposal, I think the report reflects it perfectly in the fact that the community is split on the submission and on the feedback around this recommendation. And I completely appreciate the need of protecting our biodiversity and aligning ourselves with our plans and protecting our environment, because it is very important. But I think we've also got to look at, yes, educating through a change in bylaw is one way of doing it, and I completely respect that. But I think what we're talking about, and even I think encompassed within our our biodiversity plan as well, is that education from that general point of view as well. Do we need to have the bylaws to be able to educate the community on the importance of our natural resources in these biodiversity areas, or can we do that more through an active campaign and educating them without dividing the other half of the community as well against submissions such as this? So I guess in taking all of that into account, and it's not an easy one to make a decision on either, I'm going to have to be voting against this proposal tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. If there's no further discussion or questions, I'll now put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. We now move on to recommendation 9. Once again, dog leash, and this is dog leashing requirements. The decision retains the status quo being that during daylight savings, October to March, dogs must be on leash between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. during daylight savings, and may be off leash but under effective control between 8 p.m. and 10 a.m. during daylight savings. Non-daylight savings, April to September, dogs may be off leash but must be under effective control during non-daylight savings. And this decision reflects the status quo. Can I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Quinton. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield?
I'd just like to ask a question. Effective control. Can someone please explain exactly what effective control is, being a dog owner?
Dustin, I think this is back in your ballpark.
Thank you for the question. Through the Mayor, in the bylaw, and especially in our dogs bylaw, we also have a definition that matches the definition with the Dog and Cat Management Act. So effective control means a person exercising effective control of a dog either by means of a physical restraint, by command, the dog being in close proximity to the person and the person being able to see the dog at all times. So that matches the statewide position. It's always going to be a subjective area, but is one that is very clearly aligned if a dog can return by command.
Thank you. Councillor Coimbra.
Thank you for that, Dustin. Effective control, yes, it is a very important question because, and as you reiterate, there's a lot of grey area. The issue is that we use this as part of our enforcement. So how can we enforce something when it's so grey? If you speed over the limit, you get a fine. The next question I was going to ask is, effective control, is that 2 metres, 5 metres, 10 metres, 100 metres?
Through the Mayor. Very good question. There is actually a lot of case law surrounding this very argument. So case law has delineated as little as 2 metres and as much as 10 metres. So our base is everything that we make our decisions is on previous case law decisions. So the definition of effective control for us is, again, leaning on the dog returning to command. And ideally, if there is an issue with a dog that has a pattern of behaviour, our recommendation may be by way of an order, either a menacing or a harassing order, and we would be recommending further controls, which may be a maximum 2 metre lead.
Just a follow-up question. So case law, so we'll obviously, would we be able to be presented with that case law? The council has stipulated there's case law, so it'd be nice to be able to verify that. Thanks.
Absolutely, it's public case law.
Great, thanks. My question also is, so between 2 and 10 metres, are there any markings on the beach that as an enforcement officer from a distance, are you able to verify what is 2 to 10 metres? Because I'm a builder and I have to be relatively close to identify that. So just wondering how your enforcement officers would identify what is 2 to 10 metres.
Through the Mayor, I guess measuring distance isn't exactly what we're about in our field, as all our officers are trained dog and cat management officers. They've undertaken extensive investigations training. Again, our enforcement policy dictates that we educate owners. So when we feel that if a dog was at 11 metres, that may not be enough for us to go and issue an expiation. We would still educate that person, as we have done with many people within our community, continue to do in our community, is about making sure the return on command. I believe that the distance a dog is from an owner and behaviour of that dog is very obvious when you have training in that field and you've been around animals a lot, that you understand what that means. And when a dog could be under effective control, it may be 15 metres from you because of the behaviour of that dog also. So it really depends on fact and degree of the case at hand.
So essentially your infringement notices are based on whether the dog can be called back effectively, correct? If you can't judge the distance and the owner calls the dog back, there's no reason to give that person an infringement notice?
Again, through the Mayor, it depends on fact and degree of the situation. And it also depends on the behaviour of the dog, or also who else is also using that area or shared space.
Thank you, Dustin. Councillor Burns.
Just a clarification question, if I could, Dustin. I wasn't here when the original timeframes that the previous council, I understand, voted on that. I'm just trying to get my head around the impact of on-leash, off-leash during certain times. And I understand the logic if you're talking about humans and children and people interacting with dogs, but I'm struggling to see plants and birds. So after 8 o'clock, I can have a dog run free on the beach, chasing birds and so forth. I mean, the birds are still going to be there, the plants are still going to be there after 8 o'clock. I'm not quite seeing why there's a time constraint on there. That's all. I just need to understand that better. For people not being on the beach at that hour, less people having a dog free, I get. But I'm trying to, this is all about biodiversity, protecting birds. Usually I think they'd be nesting or in their nests. I'm just trying to understand the rationale. What was the logic behind the time frame? And why those hours? Because a lot of the people are elderly going out. They're not going to walk in nighttime. They're going to want to go out during daytime.
Through the Mayor, I can assure you we're not trying to restrict our amazing community and visitors from walking their dogs. That's not the intent of this. The very clear intent is separating the times of daylight savings to the recommendation you just endorsed before about our 24/7 areas of our estuaries. So that's a requirement that dogs will be on lead at all times, whether daylight savings, non-daylight savings. The allocation of times runs on consistency across what council was applied previously. So for us, with the times, like we said, with the main priority times of our beaches and the visitors to our area, it is between 10 and 8 p.m. So during daylight savings. The biodiversity and plants was dealt with in the previous resolution. This one moving forward is about numbers of people. It also has a balance on a number of things. We've already approved the bylaws which have provisions in there for protection of our hooded plovers. So there are fenced areas that protect them or require owners to put their dogs on leads at those times. But for us, the population brings another risk factor that we need to try and mitigate, yes.
Councillor Schiller?
I think this is a good option because having my own situation with a dog, which there are people out there that are vulnerable, that might be elderly or using an assistance dog. And if people do not have their dog under effective control, it can mean a disastrous consequence for people when they are the person who may have a dog which is bearing down upon them. And so the effective control, although we can't specify the meterage, we all know if a dog is running to you at full pelt and the owner has called it back and it's not coming back, that's not effective control.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question on Mr. Peter Watts, considering you said, Justin, that, you know, giving out an expiation notice can be quite subjective. Considering what we know about what happened with Mr. Peter Watts, is there an opportunity for council to waiver those expiations? Because
Councillor Kemp, can you please keep your comments related to the specific recommendation? And we are not talking about expiation notices here at the moment in the chamber.
That's okay, Mayor. I just thought I'll raise the question because we are talking about on lead, off lead, and expiations were mentioned before. I'm not supporting this as holistically as it's written, because I think that you know, there's opportunities, especially in daylight saving, that, you know, a lot of people don't finish work until 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and of course, you know, they want to take their dogs for a walk, but they want to get home with their families around 8 o'clock. So I'd like to see whether there's some movability in some of the timelines to actually bring from 10 a.m. to say 6 p.m. You know, to allow families to take their dogs down on the beach, you know, and off lead. Because when you look at a dog's behaviour, especially when you've got 2 dogs running together or exercising, they need to run and exercise. You know, to constrain them to just on lead walking is not exercising your dogs. And I think that we should be more flexible. You know, I'm in 2 minds of whether to vote against this because I want the hours deleted completely, or we amend the agenda motion to actually restrict the hours on lead and more hours off lead, especially when more daylight is available for families to move their animals around and exercise the animals. Again, off lead is about effective control. Again, as the other issue. And of course, the biggest problem I believe, Justin, you've got is that when we get our population doubles in Christmas, you know, another 15,000 people you've got to educate. So about dogs and animals, because they're bringing all their pets down. So I'm not quite sure how you're going to manage that one. But I'll move an amendment on daylight saving hours from October to March from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to give more daylight hours for off lead for families with their pets.
So I'm not quite sure that I understand, Councillor Kemp. It's the motion as it reads now is dogs up until 10 a.m. between 8 p.m. at night. So when people get home from work and then go out at 8 p.m. all the way through to 10 p.m. the dogs can be off leash and under effective control.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that during the daylight hours, where you got on leash between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m, I'm saying we bring it back to 6 p.m. 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Dogs are on lead. So that gives an extra 2 hours at night in daylight time for families to exercise their dogs on the beach in daylight hours.
Can I just get some feedback from Dustin in terms of how that might work?
It's important to know that the recommendations were based on the consultation feedback. I actually believe, my opinion, that it would be great to create a consistent approach across some of these daylight savings times. So in saying that, Alexandrina currently do 10 till 6. So if that was an option that the chamber wished to go for, we would obviously support that. But based on the feedback we received through consultation, it was to leave it at 8 p.m. That's why this is the recommendation.
Thank you. So you've got your amendment, Stuart, you're saying you'll second that? Let me just check. All right. Yep.
Sorry, Mayor Jenkins, I still haven't finished my 3 minutes.
I thought you were putting in an amendment. Carry on.
I have put amendment in, now I'm speaking to the amendment.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I think that being in line with, especially for our tourists and for our people who move between council boundaries and beaches, that if we are consistent with neighbouring councils, then it makes it much easier to enforce the rules and laws around dog behaviour and dog management. So I think that is a good plus, that if we get in line with Alexandrina, I'm not quite sure about Yankalilla if they have the same laws around the times for daylight, if they're 6 p.m. as well. So we're the odd council out. So let's fall in line and provide our community and our visitors with a better daylight time for dogs off lead under effective control. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just go and ask if there's anybody who's got any questions or wants to speak to the amendment. Councillor Schiller, you spoke to the motion, so you won't be able to speak to the motion again. You haven't spoken to the amendment. So if you speak to the amendment, you've already spoken to the motion. But so you can speak to the amendment if you like, but that's it. Yep.
I think that because we have gone to public consultation, and that's the whole point of public consultation, that we should stick to the hours that we went out to public consultation. And if we want to review that in the future, let's take it on later on.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to the amendment? No, I'll put the amendment to the vote then. All those in favour of the amendment? And those against the amendment? Councillor Mann, did you vote? Sorry, I didn't see. Are you against? For? Those for the amendment, can you put your hand up again? And those against the amendment? That amendment has been carried and becomes part of the motion. So the motion now is that dogs must be on leash between 10 a.m. and 6. Oh, sorry, yeah, on leash between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. And off leash between 6 p.m. and 10 a.m. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Discussion, Mayor.
Oh, so I beg your pardon. You haven't had the discussion with that. Sorry, Councillor Mann.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, I think Councillor Kemp's amendment he put up, I think there's utility in it. In the consultation report, though the hours we put out were as current, there was scope within the consultation to look at where there's need for the adjustment, and as it is in the report, it came back that several community members did suggest that moving in line with Alexandrina Council, I think as the administration have set out in their response, that could be done as a trial period or something to consider. But I think from what we've heard tonight as well, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if there were issues to arise with this change in the time or that we saw from the community, we could respond to that change in a relatively quick sense if those issues did arise to meet them. But I think take into account the extensive feedback that we've received from the community, and especially the dog owners who have consulted and engaged with council on this, I think this would be something that would probably be seen by as a win for a lot of them, to look at those extra times where they can go down to the beach on great weather days such as this. So I think this is a good motion that we should try.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Any further discussion? Councillor Burns, you've got a question?
If elected members could receive the full data from the 200 respondents, not just the summary, I'd actually like to look at the full data if we could.
I'm sure it can be put in the elected members' room.
That'll be great. Thank you.
Councillor Quinton, did you want to close the debate? Oh, sorry, councillor Henderson first.
I have a question about whether this decision retains the status quo, given that we've changed the times.
No, it doesn't retain the status quo. Councillor Quinton, do you want to?
Yeah, I think this is a positive step forward, and I'm glad that we're retaining the general gist of this, even if we've changed the times. I've had one kid of mine that was bitten by a dog on Hayborough Beach, so I feel quite passionate about this effective control of dogs when you're walking on the beach, because it is a very scary experience. And I do spend a significant amount of my week stitching up dogs and cats that are mauled by other dogs that aren't under effective control, generally down on the beach. So I'm glad that this is going through, hopefully.
Thank you. I now put that resolution to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. And the last one is that the application of bylaw 5 resolve that the Victor Harbour Dog Park located at the corner of George Main Road and Oval Park Road is an exercise area for the purposes of being a dog park. And that retains the status quo. Moving that way, councillor Quinton, seconding councillor Burns. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? Those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now, oh, sorry, keep going. I thought we only had 10. I thought we only had 10. We've got more. Oh, 10. We've got, oh, that was all the dogs ones. That's what I had highlighted. Okay. So bylaw 11, which relates to the foreshore, that retains the status quo, and I'll take that as read. With some moving that way, councillor Henderson, and seconding that. Thank you, councillor Quinton. Do either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Commencement of application of bylaws. Bylaws to take effect from the 12th of December. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield and Councillor Schiller seconding that. Can I just ask a question of Dustin? In relation to the bylaws, is there a problem with us making them take effect from the next council meeting as opposed to this council meeting? I'm just thinking of the initial discussion about when you might be able to get signs and get some education going. So I wonder if we're able to have the bylaws take effect in a month, which will give time for education and signs and whatnot.
Back through yourself, the Mayor. The impact would be that the current bylaws, I believe, expire on the 5th of January or 4th of January from top of head. That would mean that until the next council meeting, no provisions of the bylaws that we're voting on today would come into play. So there would be a period where no bylaw provisions may apply in the community.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers any questions that were going to be coming up. So that's moved by Councillor Schofield and seconded by Councillor Schiller. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Public notice is that we need to put a determination of the application of the bylaws in the Government Gazette. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. Councillor Burns, thank you. Do either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? Those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. And the authorisations the Council delegates to the Chief Executive Officer or delegate under parts 2 and 3 of bylaws, permits and penalties. And the rest of that I'll take as read. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Seconding Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? Thank you, Councillor Kemp, and then Councillor Burns.
I'll start with a question, if I don't mind, Mayor, to the CEO. If this is not passed, as a delegation to you, would any permission for people undertaking activity under the council bylaws come back to chamber for approval if you don't get the delegation?
Yes, it would. But again, they all need to be authorised officers, so it's no different to any other delegation that you require for me to administer to oversee those staff that are authorised officers. So I need to have a delegation to have the authority to oversee them as well.
Okay, so it's not the chamber who has authorisation to change any activity under the bylaws.
You change the activities of the bylaws, I administer them.
Yeah, so I'm saying this delegation gives you the authority
to administer them as you have resolved to implement them.
Well, it's talked about a person seeking permission, you know, to undertake an activity under the council bylaws that is otherwise prohibited under the council bylaws.
Yep. So under certain lands bylaws, someone could seek a permit to do something on land. I can provide them with that permit. They can't just do it free for all because you've got bylaws now. Busking would be an example. They would need to seek a permit.
Yep. So one my question was that if this is not passed to give you delegation, then any request to have an activity otherwise prohibited will come to chamber for approval.
Or specific things for council lands, but
yes,
this resolution encapsulates all of the other provisions to implement and oversee those bylaws as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burns. It's been answered. I've just been asked can you please remember to speak into your microphone. We have people in the foyer that are also trying to listen, so just makes it clearer for them. Does anybody else have any questions or any discussion on that? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. And I think that is it. Advisory and working group review. Thank you very much, Dustin. Much appreciated. 9.3, the first recommendation is that council receive and note the review report as provided in attachment A. Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Either of you want to speak to the report? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
At the information workshop that we had, I had, and I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that there was consensus to change the name of the boating facilities working group to the Blue Water Economy Advisory Group. I understand the terms of reference still have to be done, but my understanding is that the elected members have to vote on setting up or establishing a subcommittee or advisory group or a work group. And even though we changed the terms of reference, it's still having the boating facilities working group, which was not the intent of what we discussed. In addition, it's acknowledged that the Encounter Bay Oval group be established.
Sorry, Councillor Burns,
yep.
When we go through those recommendations
sure.
and specific to the groups, then you might want to bring up your concerns then. At
okay.
the moment, we're just receiving and noting the report.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything to say about receiving and noting the report? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. So we now come to recommendation 2 in relation to the agribusiness working group. I'll take that as read. Happy to move that way, Councillor Henderson. Thank you. And seconding that. Thank you, Councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to the agribusiness working group recommendation?
I need that. I agree with everything that's written there. It's good.
Sorry, yep. Does anybody else have any questions about that group? Put it to the floor then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. The Arts and Culture Advisory Group. I'll take that as read as well. And you can read it on the screen for those people who don't have a agenda in front of them. Someone like to move that recommendation? Thank you, councillor Schofield, and seconding councillor Burns. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. The Boating Facilities Working Group, would someone like to move that recommendation? Thank you, councillor Kemp, and seconding councillor Schiller. Either of you want to speak to that?
Yes, I'd like to bury this motion, the title to the Blue Water Advisory Group. It's my variation. The reason being is that I think the Blue Water is encompassing. It covers everything about what a boating advisory group would have done in the past, but plus it expands it even more in a holistically point of view. You know, commercial, recreational fishing, recreational boating, on shore, around the shore area of the ocean and various things like that. So I think the Blue Water Advisory Group will cover a lot of areas and also expands their role slightly along the idea of maybe sometimes around about biodiversity along the coastline as well, because it's about impact by humans on the coastline. So they may have some advice on how we could do that. Not necessarily as a component, as the main one, but more along the lines of that they take on board the activity of a blue water activity as to how the impacts are on the blue water and off the blue water along our coastline. And they may make recommendations to another committee to look at various functions or aspects of it, because they're across the whole aspect of the blue water aspects of it. So I just like to see the variation to a Blue Water Advisory Group.
Are you happy with that variation, councillor Schiller?
Query, the terms of reference for that group they are going to be altered in a future meeting, is that correct?
That is correct. The
So
terms of reference are for the Boating Facilities Working Group. They can be changed.
So can the name be changed when the terms of reference have been put together?
Yes, it can.
So I think until the terms of reference are put together and we've worked out the actual structure and what their actual terms of reference are, we can change the name at that time.
Thank you. So your seconder doesn't want to vary the motion. Councillor Kemp, did you want to put in an amendment, or do you want to go with what Councillor Schiller has suggested?
Well, I guess the only option open to me is to adjourn this motion until the terms of reference are written, where the name is changed appropriately at that time, then bring it back to council for approval.
You've already moved your motion, so you can't do a formal motion.
Yes, I can. I can do a formal motion after a motion. Formal motion can be moved by anybody at any time.
I'll just check.
Yep, sure. Thank you.
Check the meeting procedures. Spoken to move this. A member who's spoken in the debate. A second. Just wait for this, Angela, otherwise I'll get myself confused. Second. Spoken. Silent.
The Code of Practice meeting procedures say if you've seconded the motion, you can move or second a formal motion, but you were the mover of the motion. So it doesn't actually give you the permission to move a formal motion to your own motion that you've moved.
Does it actually say that, or it's just not written that way?
It's silent. It specifically says council, it actually, the Act or regulations say if you've moved or seconded a motion, you can't move a formal motion. We have varied that to say if you've seconded a move or seconded a motion, you can second a formal motion. That's our variation.
Because it's silent, then I can move it, adjournment motion. Because it's silent. Because it doesn't, because the meeting procedures don't say I can't move a formal motion.
If it's silent, then I would say it'd be up to the presiding member.
Maybe up to the chamber.
They need to
If-
move a motion if they allow you to move the formal motion. If I may, through the mayor, and I know Councillor Schiller has a question, the purpose of amending the terms of reference, it's in endorsing the working parties and those members that are currently on those working parties to remain on there, was for the purposes of those working parties reviewing those terms of reference. And yes, the blue water economy was discussed at the workshop. We've also received some information from members of the working party who would actually support those discussions or changes. You're about to actually endorse the investment attraction strategy, which has a reference in that about the blue water economy. And I would have suggested that once that's endorsed, that you take those things into consideration and restructure and reform your terms of reference, which includes your title and your purpose. And that would come back to the chamber for endorsement. But what you're doing now is enabling those committees or working groups to exist to undertake that.
Unless another member likes to move an adjournment, I can withdraw my motion and then give me the prerogative to adjourn it later so that we can get all the ducks in a row.
If you want to, because this is silent on a formal motion and that's something that we need in procedures, so that it's more explicit. I'll let you do your formal motion on that, but I'll give it that you've spoken to your motion. Ready?
Just need to clarify the formal motion that I adjourn it so that the terms of reference can be written with a new title and be brought back to the council meeting in February.
Is there a seconder for your formal motion? So Burns, there is no debate on a formal motion. I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour of adjourning this? Those against? That's lost. Again, I'll come back to the original motion. Yes, you can ask your question.
Previously, with our I think it was our agribusiness working group, we didn't change our name at that point in time, and therefore the advice that we got at that meeting, I thought that was it. If the terms of reference change, which they will, then that would become an advisory group. So that is sort of an example of how one committee has already gone through the process without a name change, and this particular one, the name change is occurring midstream.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Does anybody, so you've still moved that motion, Councillor Kemp, you're the mover of that. Councillor Schiller seconded it. Does anybody else want to speak to that? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. We now move to the Heritage Advisory Group, and the same recommendations are made in relation to the Heritage Advisory Group. Do I have somebody to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Burns. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Karimba. Do either of you want to speak to that? No. Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Victor Harbour Oval Planning Group. Would someone like to move that recommendation? Councillor Burns. Councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to it? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Number 7, that Council dissolve the following advisory working groups. Counter Bay Future Recreation and Sport Working Group, Recreation and Sport Grant Working Group, Renewable Energy Advisory Group and the Youth Advisory Group. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And seconding that? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Do either of you want to speak to that? No, does anybody want to speak to that? Put it to the floor. Councillor Mann.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I think it's just good to clarify with my understanding with these advisory and working groups is that they haven't been used for some time now and sort of been sitting up there on the shelf. And I think looking at the need for our advisory groups through this process has been one of great utility. And I think as well, just as we've discussed at the workshop, looking at with the youth advisory committee is, you know, even without that formal adult structure of a council committee, which I know a lot of youth are just dying to be on, but I think, you know, it's looking at how can we engage with our young people in a way that is much more accessible for them. But I'm confident our youth officer and administration will work on that. So I'm happy in that sense to dissolve that committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. And yes, I think our youth department as such are doing some great, really innovative things outside of that group. Councillor Burns.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate about the youth advisory group. I had concerns before the workshop that we had that by removing that group may dilute the youth vote within the community, but the workshop satisfied me, so I understand the rationale behind it, so good.
Thank you. Any further discussion? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Recommendation 8, that Council establish a recreation and sport grant panel consisting of Councillor Kemp, Councillor Quinton and 2 council staff as determined by the Chief Executive Officer to assess the recreation sport grant applications commencing on the 13th of December and concluding at the periodic elections. Moving that way, Councillor Schiller. Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Any discussion? Either of you want to say anything? Any discussion from anybody else? Put it to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Number 9, Council liaise with regular users of the Encounter Bay Recreation Complex to determine the interest in establishing a new advisory group and work collectively to develop a draft terms of reference for Council consideration. Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson moving and seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to it? Councillor Burns?
I was just a question whether we could utilise the Victoria Harbour Oval Planning Group terms of reference as a basis for the terms of reference for the Encounter Oval Group. Yep. It must be fairly similar. There'll be obviously some amendments, but I would have thought, and I would have thought the timeframes shouldn't be too long, because I do know a lot of the clubs there are quite keen. If this was pursued, they noticed it in the agenda and were quite excited about it, which is good.
I think that's a great idea, and if we've got I was going to say Councillor Kemp and Councillor Quinton, but that's the Sport and Rec grant applications. But no, that will hand that over to administration to work with. Any further discussions on that? Okay, so I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. And the last one, Council, as part of the upcoming introduction of the sector-wide Community Engagement Charter and subsequent requirement to review its community engagement policy and framework, consider implementing a modern, less formal engagement approach to achieve better participation from a broader cross-section of the community. Moving that way, Councillor Schofield, and seconding that. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
Thank you. What I recall from the workshop was that whilst this will be obviously create some efficiencies, that I thought we talked about still retaining the current process and adding this to it. A lot of people in the community don't go on social media, don't go online doing surveys, which is probably reflected in our low response. They like to have get information from advisory groups and also like where the council goes into shopping centres and other areas. And I understand this will complement it, but I'd hate to see this replace what I think is working quite well for those people who, which is really a large portion of our community, that need that other approach. So I think having both is probably beneficial rather than have one or the other.
Yeah, and I'd hate to see us throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, because I think our community engagement policy is great, but it can be better. And I think some of the things we've been doing in a more informal way, like the shopping centre consultations and going out to the community about the dogs on leash at the community meetings there, I think are great, and really is what this is about. Thank you. Is there any further discussion in relation to that? Do you want to close the debate, Councillor Schofield? No. I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? Councillor Burns? In favour? Favour? That's carried. Thank you. Community and development. We are now looking at 10.1, the Victor Harbour Investment Attraction Strategy adoption. I'll do recommendation, it's got 1 and 2 on block rather, if someone's happy to move that on block. Thank you, Councillor Quinton. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anyone want to speak to it? Councillor Koremba and then Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Just bringing up a couple of things that I have issues with regarding the investment strategy. In the consultation with the elected members, one section here, elected members and Business Victor Harbour Workshop, Council should take a greater lead in the area of investment attraction. I specifically remember that we did have the workshop. I think we actually reiterated that Council should have less of a involvement, but actually just be a facilitator as such. So help Business Victor Harbour in whatever shape, way or form they need to attract more business here. So that was one thing that I had. The other one was, here it says on page 102, Victor Harbour Road is critical to the advancement of Victor Harbour economy and the capacity of economic growth, critical to reduce costs associated with freight, a priority action for Council to advocate for the upgrade of the Victor Harbour Road. Is that meaning the dual or the duplication of the Victor Harbour Road? Is that what we're saying?
I know that Council is involved through the Southern Hills LGA, looking at transport routes around the region with other councils, and looking at how we can improve transport because of where people can get stock to market quicker, and transport's improved. That will certainly help in terms of our economy.
I agree wholeheartedly, but didn't we I saw an article, I think, in the Fleurieu Sun about a petition to actually shut down overtaking lanes on Victor Harbour Road and actually reducing speed. So I'm kind of working out how they don't contradict themselves.
Yeah, no, they don't contradict themselves. They're quite different things. I think the article that you saw in the Sun was about the removal of trees around overtaking lanes, and the state government, there was a discussion with the state government, and they said that they will be looking at different ways that they can improve safety on Victor Harbour Road without having to cut down some of those trees to make the overtaking lanes. These are more about transport routes between Kangaroo Island and Mount Barker, and using the Range Road and crossing Victor Harbour Road, Armstrong Road, crossing Victor Harbour Road to Waterport Road, those sorts of things.
But the main arterial road into Victor Harbour is the Victor Harbour Road. So I understand that we try not to remove trees, but how do we duplicate the road by not removing trees? Are we suggesting that they build an overpass from McLaren Vale?
That's state government.
So we're suggesting they build an overpass from McLaren Vale. If we're not going to, if we're petitioning against removing trees, how do we duplicate the road? Because that's the main arterial road. So in order for this business attraction, sorry, can I just finish? So in order to increase traffic, B-dubs, and reduce the cost of freight into this, and Business Victor Harbour has actually been very specific about this, we do need to increase the availability of traffic B doubles coming down into Victor Harbor, that is the main arterial road. So on one hand, we're stopping because we don't want to take down trees, but on the other hand, we're saying we need to get more transport here. So once again, how are they not conflicting issues?
I'll ask the CEO to answer that for you because
Thank
it is a state government road. It's not a Victor Harbor road, and it's not part of the transport plan that the wider conversations have been about. Victoria?
Through the Mayor, I just think the important thing to note of that particular item that you're referencing, it's a priority action for council to advocate for upgrading of Victor Harbor Road. It doesn't talk about duplication. There are other methods in which the road can be upgraded. It doesn't just have to be about duplication, but yes, it's about making it more accessible for our businesses, and whether that's different trucks or BWs coming into the area, but it's around upgrading. It's not all about duplication.
Thanks for that, because yeah, it was stated by Business Victor Harbor that the duplication of that road would actually be the key issue to increasing or decreasing the cost of freight, which means all the goods that we pay down here would be cheaper if we could actually duplicate that road. So once again, I'm asking, how do they not compete?
Again, the duplication that Department of Transport just talked about and revisiting about where those duplication lanes are. There are different areas they can be on the Victor Harbor Road. Obviously, there's areas of Victor Harbor Road that just cannot be duplicated because of its terrain, but there's others that can. So they're having a reconsideration about where those duplication lanes are. It hasn't ruled it out completely. They're just reconsidering where they are.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Burns.
A clarification question, if I could, and hopefully the CEO can answer it. I was looking through the investment attraction strategy and comfortable with everything that's in here. I just couldn't find the review process. So I was going to propose a third option, which was a joint economic development committee be established to monitor progress, but it may already be covered.
Well, my understanding, you would review it annually based on whatever actions are implemented, but given it has a life from 23 to 27, I'd be saying you'd be reviewing it in 26 when a new council comes in. But you would be reconsidering it every year depending on your actions and what you're implementing.
That was my concern. If we don't review it annually, it can get away or not align with the economy and
absolutely, and that's where every time you would do an annual business plan and budget, you would look at this strategy as you do all other strategies and look at the actions that you can implement and resource in that year and then update accordingly.
You have a question, Councillor Karemba?
Yes, will we be setting any baseline metrics to which we will be measuring the improvement or the actual effectiveness of this investment strategy? So do we have, how are we going to value whether this investment strategy is actually working? Do we have tangible figures, return on sales, increase people into town? Are there any baseline figures that we can reference then in the future to see whether they're actually on the right track?
Mark Prisbilla is actually here, City Activation, but and he will certainly probably add to it. But as we do with other strategies, again, depending on its implementation, we do a business survey every year, which provides us with information around our businesses and how they are progressing. We have the number of businesses that are registered within our area, but most of it is based on the actions that you're delivering as to what your KPIs will be.
Mark, do you want to expand on that in terms of Councillor Karemba's question?
Yeah, through the Mayor, we have a series of metrics in the economic development strategy that talk to employment, business in the community, and essentially growth. I appreciate your question and I understand where you're going with that. The challenge is going to be the resources required to actually source a lot of that data, which is often not available. The basis of our performance in this space will be on the delivery. There are a lot of actions in this strategy that actually we don't know yet until we talk to the market, whether some will grow and pursue or not. So I guess we'll be looking at having some sort of dashboard around the performance of the economy, and certainly employment and workforce participation is a big key part of that.
Thank you. I'll just ask if anyone else has got anything they want to say, Councillor Corimba, before I come back to you. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. I just noticed when I went through the strategy, again, it's very similar to Councillor Corimba about measuring this, and I suppose there'll be another document will be developed to actually how we measure our success factors, our actions and various things like that, or this is the only document, because it's a very high level document and it doesn't actually provide the details of how it's going to be implemented. Even though there's 24 actions, $205,000 being allocated, I guess that will be operating budget, not capital, just for clarification for people.
Through the Mayor, so the budget tabled in the document is indicative and we're not seeking Council's commitment at this point in time. As the CEO indicated earlier, each annual business plan, we will present considerations to the Council in the budget. So what's included there is indicative.
Thank you. The other issue is about the other partner in all this is the Business Victor Harbour. They're huge, they're totally underfunded. We know that, and the Chamber's had an opportunity to fund them appropriately, but they chose not to. I'm just wondering, there's nothing in the strategy about the crucial factor that if Business Victor Harbour fails to do its job, the strategy will fall over and it won't be effective. So I'm just wondering how the strategy will support partnership arrangement with the Business Victor Harbour, because there's no funding in here for them.
Through the Mayor, I guess the funding links to the design in terms of how quickly some of these actions are achieved. If there are not resources in place, then it limits the ability to achieve the actions that are tabled. So it would limit, if it's up to the Chamber, but if it would limit the ability of Business Victor Harbour to pursue some of the actions that relate to them, which is primarily related to industry engagement.
Yep. You're right, and I guess it comes down to the fact that if we resource this appropriately, then we should see some good outcomes with this. I guess it's for another budget deliberations. But there is an action which I want to ask you about on page 125 of the agenda, number 3. Action is grow the industry sectors of health, services, construction, professional services and the visitor economy. But the 4 actions you got in there is all about tourism. Nothing about health services and nothing about construction. To me, that's a big gap.
Yeah, through the Mayor, I guess this document intends to provide a bit of a target in terms of what to pursue. We've been keen to make it clear that they are the 4 sectors that we will pursue. And to the extent to which we're successful, it's very hard to gauge at this point. And this is really why Business Victor Harbour are in the play, to start to excite interest in those sectors with us to grow our economy.
Thanks, Mark, for your information. I can't support this strategy as it's written. There are gaps in it. It doesn't actually provide, to me, a very clear direction of what we're going to achieve, how we're going to resource it. It seems to me like a piecemeal approach that we have this holistic document. It looks great, but then we go implement it annually, depending on the Chamber and its appetite to actually do something. So I thought our strategy should be about clear direction, and we are moving down that pathway to achieve it. And there would have been some more, to me personally, some more KPIs in the strategy to actually identify that these are things we want to achieve at certain milestones in order for the strategy to be effective. So I won't be supporting it as it's written.
Councillor Quinton, and then I'll come back to your question, Councillor Corimba.
The other, in addition to that, the other thing that I feel is lacking from the strategy is addressing the public transport options and transport after business hours, which I feel is severely lacking in Victor, and I feel it is a massive handbrake to being able to develop businesses down here. So with that in mind, I did raise it when we did the workshop about it, but it hasn't been included in the document, so I won't be supporting it at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Councillor Corimba, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. Is there a software program that council has access to that tracks spending in the town?
Yes.
Through the Mayor, we've previously used a product called, and it escapes my mind at the moment, that actually tracks their spend map.
spend map?
that actually tracks credit card expenditure. We've found that problematic in terms of what it actually, the metrics and the methodology that it collects, and it can be a bit misleading at times. We're currently working with the RDA on the review of the data platforms that we actually use. We currently use a product called RemPlan, which is likely to be the future product we use, which is more macro in terms of economic data we collect.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is spend map.
Yeah, and you may not know the answer to this, but does Business Victor Harbour share your views on spend map?
They haven't really expressed it, to be honest. I know we've provided some data to them over different events and so forth. I think we've come to the similar conclusion about, depending on what question you ask, as to what data you get and the timing of that data. So it's good for certain things, but it's not so effective for others.
Okay, so some data is good, some is not so good, but not something we should just throw out, potentially something as a tool. Seeing as we don't have a lot of tools, we could probably use the ones we have. Yeah,
so that particular license is $10,000 a year. We used it for 12 months to understand the value of it. We haven't renewed that license at this point in time. And I guess the challenge for us is, data is important and it's critical for our decision making, but it's also, there's a cost and a value in terms of what we spend and what we get out of it.
Just one last question. So yeah, you're right, there is return on investment on certain things.
Sorry, Councillor Quiremba.
Yeah.
Your questions are morphing into further
My apologies,
commentary.
Mayor. What, as a percentage, how important is Business Victor Harbour for this to actually see to fruition, for this strategy to actually come through as a percentage? 50%, 70%, 80%? How much are we talking?
For the Mayor, I wouldn't want to put a percentage on it, I'd say high. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there Councillor Schiller?
If we have concerns in the room, is it possible to adjourn this, allow the particulars that people would like to submit back into the strategy and then resubmit it next meeting, or is it going to the stalling of this shouldn't have any major effect on actions within the next Christmas break?
I don't think it will have any major effect, and if you want to put an adjournment motion in, happy to accept that.
I move that we adjourn this till, are we going to just submit our ideas through email, or would we rather do some kind of briefing?
You could adjourn it until the January council meeting, the February council meeting, and in between then, submit any ideas or any changes.
Is there any scope to have a partial briefing session with feedback before we come back again to endorse it?
Absolutely. We've got some briefing sessions already being scheduled for January. We can schedule it in for the 10th of January briefing session and then look to either, depending on how many changes there are, get it back to the January or February. But we'd say to a subsequent meeting of council would probably enable that to either be January or February.
All right. Can I move that motion, please?
Yep, certainly. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Burns seconding that. I'll now put that formal motion to the table. All those in favour of the formal motion?
I just have a question. Can I make an amendment to if Councillor Schiller is happy for me to make an amendment to that motion?
No, we've got a formal motion on the table. Sorry, can we all vote on the formal motion? All those in favour of the formal amendment? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Now, I am aware that we've got a number of people in the gallery that are here because of the motion on notice from Councillor Quiremba. So I'm wondering whether or not, if you want to do that sooner rather than wait until we get to that, would you be happy with that as a group? Can you put your hand up if you're happy to go to that item now? Sorry, can you put your hand up if you're happy to go to that item now? If you want to wait until it comes up naturally? Okay, we'll wait. We'll wait until it comes up naturally. So we come to 10.2, Arts and Culture Centre, Stage 1 detailed design and construction documentation. The first recommendation is that council adopt the design and construction documentation for Stage 1 of the Arts and Culture Centre project provided under separate cover. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson. And seconding that, Councillor Schofield. Would either of you like to speak to that? No? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
I just wanted re-clarification of the cost of that Stage 1.
I'll ask Graham if you can, Director Pathouse, if you can help with that question.
Through the Mayor, the initial cost estimates that were provided by the consultant for Stage 1, which is the cinema upgrade, is in the order of $6 million for both the compliance and the other aspirations for the project.
And did that include the lift? Because we did discuss the lift. Okay.
Yep. As per the detailed designs that you're looking at tonight.
Okay. I remember it went from 3 to...
yeah, it was split between the compliance elements and then the additional elements as well. So there was a pure compliance component of it, which was around about 3 million. And then for the balance of it was another 3 million, so about 6 million in total.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. Councillor Kemp and then Councillor Corimbo.
Thank you. Just a question to Director Pathouse.
I think there's a phone there. Could somebody please turn their phone off? Thank you.
Just more of a clarification, please, Director Pathouse. What's the timelines for the design and construction documentation to be finalised? So we're shovel ready to go and do it. Do we have a timeline on that?
Through the Mayor, if you're talking about Stage 1, the timeline is now. So by council adopting the detailed design and specification, that means it's ready to go to tender if and when council's ready to go to tender for it. It doesn't go to tender straight away, but it is ready for tender.
So that's all the approval of this one is just for be shovel ready to go to tender. It doesn't mean that we are going to do it. Just a matter of we may decide to do it at some stage in the future.
Through the Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
So but it also serves to finalise the development application that's in for it as well.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Corimbo.
Thank you. Just a question. If we proceed with this, the development, you're saying we're going to tender to find out the full costings, correct costings, is that right?
Through the Mayor, no, that's not right. We're not going to tender at all. This is just closing out on the design for Stage 1, and then it sits until council's ready to go to tender. Okay. And at this stage, it's well back in your long-term financial plan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because in your risk assessment, it says the reputation is, I think, a medium if we don't actually proceed quite soon with this. So I'm once again questioning why we're going forward if we're going to kick it out in the long-term financial plan. I guess my concern is that once we open this can of worms, as I've made it quite clear to other elected members, once we open this can of worms, we're going to start pumping money into this while at the same time we have another major project on our books.
Through the Mayor, the council agreed or resolved and budgeted to do Stage 1 design and documentation, no more. That occurred about 18 months ago, a couple of years ago. That project is now finished. So really what you're doing at the moment is bringing that component of the project to a close by adopting the Stage 1 documentation and details that have been presented to you and workshopped with you.
Councillor Burns, you've spoken. Have you got a question?
On that, just a quick question. We have, I think, in the long-term strategy flagged this for around 8 years or so's time. At that stage, would you say we would have to potentially redo the plans again?
Through the Mayor, it depends on whether council wanted to change the design. You wouldn't necessarily have to redo the plans again. They might need a tweak or a review though.
Is there any further discussion in relation to recommendation 1? Councillor Henderson, did you want to close the debate? I'll put it to the floor then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 2 is that council bring forward $120,000 of the capital budget allocated in the long-term financial plan for fire egress safety provisions in 2024-25 to the 2023-24 capital budget, and also allocate an additional $30,000 to the 2023-24 operating budget to address the fire safety and electrical compliant matters at the Victor Cinema, Town Hall and Coral Street Art Space. Moving that way, Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I'd like to move an alternative motion if I may.
Yep.
My alternative motion, since we've moved recommendation 1, that we will finalise the documentation and construction requirements, I move that we commence construction of stage 1 of the Arts and Culture Centre project.
That we commence stage 1.
Construction.
Construction.
Well, yes, since we've approved that process together, once that's finished, my alternative motion is that once the detailed design and construction documentation has been approved, ready for shovel readiness, that we go to stage 1 construction immediately.
I'm not going to allow that motion without notice, because it is a motion without notice, because I think that there are all sorts of costs involved with that. I think we need to workshop that, and it doesn't agree with the guiding principles of council, and therefore I can't let that go ahead.
Point of order, Mayor, I disagree with your ruling. I believe that I can move a motion, alternative motion. We already know the costings. We've already got the budget. All we need to do is just finalise the process and then make a decision about timelines as to when we go for tender to go to construction.
It's important for me to make sure that the elected members understand the impact of any motions that are made by the chamber, and that includes motions without notice, even though that is related to what you're talking about here. If I have a look at the guidelines in terms of I don't know what page, Victoria. The guiding principles. Guiding principles. The CEO has just suggested that you provide a bit more clarity. I'm still concerned that you're able to move it. I don't think that you are able to move it. But if you can give me some clarity so that the elected members are clear on what you're actually moving and what you're asking for, what the budget considerations are if we go ahead with this, given that it's in the long-term financial plan not to be done for about 8 years. Can you?
I'll try to clarify it more succinctly. I guess it's that go to construction, go to tender in the 24-25 financial year to construct stage 1 of the Arts and Culture Centre. So in our budget deliberations in January, February next year, we then budget for a capital project with grant funding, et cetera, to implement stage 1. And there's very sound reasons why I'll put that motion up. And we've already done workshops on it. We understand the implications and the costings of it. We've seen the designs. So I don't see that not allowing my motion is not jeopardising the ability of the council to make a decision for this. It's just a fact that they've already had this information provided to them.
I'd like some advice from Graham Pathouse and also from Victoria McCurdy in relation to this, because I think that it's a significant ask of the chamber, and they need to be fully up to date with what they're going to be voting on.
So I've got Kelly's looking at me, but I was going to suggest your motion should be more along the lines that council bring forward its provisions in the long-term financial plan for the construction of stage 1 of the Arts and Cultural Precinct, and that the administration proceed to a tender process to facilitate that. But I'll just ask Kelly, but that's pretty much what you need to do. You need to bring those funds forward, not just go to construction.
Thank you. That's why I sit here and that's why you sit there. Thank you.
Kelly, can I have your input, please?
Yeah, thank you through the Mayor. The concern that I would see is that you have a long-term financial plan that you have recently endorsed. And whilst that can be reviewed at any time by council and changed, because the pricing is quite high and you have a number of items already in the long-term financial plan in the first couple of years, you may want to consider what the impact of that on rates and borrowings and interest is, and whether or not other projects need to be deferred to compensate or offset that. So it would probably be prudent to have a look at that in its entirety, so that you know the full impact and you have all the information you need to make a decision for that amount of money.
Thank you. I'll take on board the CEO's advice that by moving a motion, alternative motion, by bringing forward the stage 1 of the long-term financial plan into the 24-25 financial year, that should give us 6 months of deliberation discussions to see whether that's viable to do that for all the reasons that the finance manager has said. So alternative motion is bringing forward from the long-term financial plan stage 1 of the Arts and Culture Centre. I think if I captured that correctly from the CEO's point of view, it's really about bringing forward a discussion around why we should do stage 1, and there are reasons for that. It's really about public safety is the main factor behind my alternative motion.
Do you have a seconder for that alternative motion? Councillor Karemba, do you want to speak to that?
Well, could I speak to? I've
tried to. You've just been speaking to.
I've been articulating the motion, but I need just to give you a quick overview as to why I've brought this alternative motion forward. Okay. The reason being that when you look at recommendation 2, that is just a quick fix of, doing fire compliance to become adequate. By doing the full upgrade of the stage 1 of the cinema, is about being fully compliant with fire safety provisions. It also gives full inclusion for disabled and disability people to access, the upstairs area in a safe manner. So it's really about doing it now while we can, because the recommendation 2 is a bit of a quick fix, which is like a band-aid, and it doesn't cover all what I would call quality public safety in the cinema.
Councillor Karemba, do you want to speak to it?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Kemp, but more along the lines of that 120,000. And first of all, I'd actually like to say thank you for the administration acknowledging the electrical issues that I brought up previously, and we're looking to rectify those. But that 120,000 plus the 30, and I've looked at some of the estimates, I think are way off for any works that need to be done to really make that building safe. But as Councillor Kemp said, if we are actually going to make this building inclusive, then this is something that we should be looking at. I do bear in mind there will be budgetary implications, and I would sort of caution to make sure that we can do this within our means, but at this stage I'm happy to support his motion.
Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Mann, then Councillor Burns, then Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I definitely have a few concerns about this motion, and I appreciate the collaboration with administration around looking at trying to achieve what Councillor Kemp's wanting to achieve by this. But I think I take it this isn't the best way of going about it. We have the long-term financial plan that's been through thorough consultation that we've just set. We've also, I believe, either just put it or will soon put it to a SCOSA to review in line with everything. And bringing forward a capital project of this magnitude is completely changing the whole dynamics of our next 10-year period. So there's big concerns around that. Also, the reminder that our audit committee has brought up in relation to we have to be very considerate in the chamber about chucking in and bringing up new expensive things at this stage and looking at doing it through that budgeted process as well. And I think even though this is looking at making that change and not necessarily committing those funds, I don't think it's appropriate for us to be making the decision on the fly like this without considering all of our other significant capital projects, our operating, and the flow-on effects as administration of advisor bringing forward the capital project to those years without looking at holistically and what's getting pushed out, what's being reworked. Because at the moment, if that just comes forward as proposed, there's going to be significant financial constraints in those years, and potentially we won't pass what SCOSA when they're doing a review of that. So however, in acknowledging the intent around the motion, I think it is a good idea to have this discussion around, can we bring forward our arts and culture precinct earlier? And noting the previous recommendation, I thought really met a lot of those fire safety from that adequacy point of view. We had that discussion around meeting our standards in terms of them being adequate. Now, they don't have to be, as we at this stage or for the next period of time, the compliant, because if everything was compliant, it would be upgraded every year, every time the building rules changed. But what I think the previous recommendation did well was it achieved adequate based on the current Building Code of Australia and building ministerial fire standards. So I guess acknowledging all of that and what Councillor Kemp's trying to achieve, I think I would be interested in putting forward a formal motion to adjourn the motion until maybe January or February for a briefing to give us the opportunity to have this discussion that I think Councillor Kemp's wanting to have.
So we've got a formal motion on the table. Do we have a seconder to adjourn this to?
Have a point of order, please.
What's your point of order, Councillor Kemp?
Well, we're only mover and seconder, so we haven't voted on the motion, so the motion may be lost. So there's no point adjourning it unless, again, it's looking for clarity around process.
Still a formal motion. You've got a mover and a seconder, and I've got a formal motion on the table.
Thank you.
Procedurally, I need to go with the formal motion.
Yep. Thank you for that, Mayor.
Do I have a seconder for the formal motion? Councillor Henderson? Braden. So the formal motion is to adjourn this until the workshop in February and the council meeting in February. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 10.3, request for funding from the Encounter Sculpture.
Sorry, Mayor Jenkins, can I move the previous motion, the number 2?
Yes, you can do that. That didn't take the form. That didn't take the place. You weren't moving all of this until.
No, just the motion that Councillor Kemp put up, because I think they're very separate motions. So I'm happy to move number 2 as it's been put up.
That's fine. Sorry, my misunderstanding there. So you're happy to move number 2. Do I have a seconder for that, Councillor Henderson? Do you want to speak to that, Braden?
Not too much more to say. I guess, as discussed, these meet those adequacy standards, and we've had that lengthy discussion with the chair of our Building Fire Safety Committee. So I think this allocation of the capital is good to achieve those, and I don't think, even despite the conversations that are to be had in February, I think this is very much independent of that, because these works are required regardless. And I think noting all the concerns have been raised in the chamber previously about the fire safety standards, I think it's a good sign to the community that council is taking an active role in trying to meeting those risks and trying to address them. So I think there's a lot of merit in this.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, did you want to speak? No. Councillor Koremba and then Councillor Burns.
Just a question potentially for Director Pathouse. These figures that are here, that's pertaining to the 150,000, is that correct? The estimates?
Through the mayor, if you're referring to the table in
Yep.
the
agenda.
report that adds up to 150,000, yes.
Okay.
Correct.
These estimates, how do they come about?
Some of them are estimates, some of them are based on quotes.
Okay, so we don't know.
Hence contingencies in there as well.
Okay, so we don't think we're going to go above the 150 plus, including the contingency, or that could be 300. Estimates are plus or minus. Do we know what the figure is, plus or minus?
No, they're estimates that total $150,000 at this stage
Okay.
with a contingency.
Okay, and would that be brought back to the chamber if it was a lot more than 150,000?
If it was more than budget we had for it, yes, it would.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councillor Mann that this needs to be spent, but I also have the similar concerns as Councillor Kemp and Councillor Corimba. Having been through the cinema, what I'm concerned about is this may not be enough. Once you actually do the work, they may find structural and other issues that need to be addressed and come back. And I'm pleased that at least that'll get raised. My concern, I understand a lot of the discussions going on, and the Arts Centre has been waiting for 20 plus years, but we can only afford one. And if we're going to do this, then we have to defer some other major projects, and hence that'll come out in the workshop. But what I'm worried about is we'll already commit to some other major projects by then, and should we find that it needs more to address a lot of the structural issues, which is almost part of stage one, then we are in a situation. I don't want to be at a point that we have to borrow more or raise rates. And I think we need that discussion that we're going to have in December, but also concerned that we'll commit to some other big projects before then, and that worries me. I think this is, until you actually do the work, you won't actually know what you may find.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Kemp?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions to Director Padhouse first before I make a comment. In this costings, I noticed that when you talk about emergency lighting, it doesn't cover the emergency lighting in the cinemas on ground floor and the upstairs cinemas. So if the lights go out or there's a blackout, everyone in the cinema won't be able to see where they're going to get out of the building. It's only the egress areas of going down the stairs or the projector rooms, but it doesn't actually talk about emergency lighting in the actual cinemas. Or is there emergency lighters in the current cinemas?
Through the mayor, you just answered your own question. Yes, there is emergency lighting in the cinemas already. So they're the gaps that were identified by the Building Fire Safety Committee.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And the other question I've got, in your costings, there's no costings for an additional stair, fire exit upstairs for the upstairs cinema. So we've got no fire exit for the upstairs.
Through the mayor again, correct. It's based on the report received from the Building Fire Safety Committee, which didn't require that.
Well, I guess in that workshop it was questionable about the answers the Building Fire Safety Committee chair gave about a fire exit. He believes that you can just walk down the stairs in a fire and walk out through the northern area. I mean, we don't even have costings for going from the staircases down to the northern area to accept the building that way. So I'll support this if we put in a fire exit for the cinema upstairs for public safety, because at the moment, if there is a fire in the kiosk or on the ground floor area, people in the upstairs cinema will not get out because there's no fire exit, and that's the current state of play. So I think we can go further and bigger than what the Building Fire Safety Committee given. We can add more to it if we wanted to give better public safety to our community and visitors. So and if we can't put that in, then I won't vote for this, because it's just a band-aid effect.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to make any contribution to the debate? You've got a question, Councillor Corimba?
Thanks. Just a question for Director Padhouse. And I haven't been to the cinema for a while, but there is signage that indicates the fire exit plan from upstairs. Is that right?
Evacuation plans.
Yeah, evacuation. Yes. Yeah. So that indicates that if in the case of a fire, you have downstairs in the lobby, you have to come from upstairs down through the lobby. That's correct?
through the mayor, you have to, yes, go down the stairs and then take,
Exit.
yeah, and then go follow the exit signs.
Yeah, exit through the fire outside. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Schiller?
A query about the external fire exit that David Kemp is indicating. Is it possible to put that in? And do we have, I know this, an idea of what sort of costing something like that is going to cost? And does that change the equation with compliance once you start fiddling around with that?
Through the mayor, my view would be that it doesn't necessarily change the compliance because it's not required for compliance by the Building Fire Safety Committee. That would be over and above what the Building Fire Safety Committee require or have asked for, and that hasn't been costed. But it could be costed, but it just hasn't been costed in this because it's not what's been required by the Building Fire Safety Committee.
Councillor Schiller?
Are we, I know we've been doing lots of adjourning, but can we adjourn this particular motion and have an approximate costing, or is it going to be needing a very solid costing, which is going to cost the cost, if you know what I mean?
If you want to adjourn it, you can do that.
All right, I would like to adjourn it until we get some idea of costings for the external stairwell from the upstairs cinema.
Thank you. And we could probably have that discussion and perhaps get that costing so that when we have the briefing and discussion around Councillor Kemp's adjourned motion, that can be done at the same time. So you've got Angela Schiller as moving adjournment. Councillor Kemp was seconding the adjournment. All those in favour? 2, 3, 5. And those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move on to request for funding the Encounter sculpture. And the recommendation is that Council declines the request from Encounter Celebrations in relation to funding for their public art piece. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Henderson. And seconding that, Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, even though I appreciate the quality and the sentiment of this artwork, and I was in favour of giving in principle support to this idea and this artwork previously, I just feel that $70,000 is a lot of money to ask this council for to support this. We already have a process for funding public art, and we have budget allocations allocated towards that. And that's usually done through a tender process, and a panel, through a panel, make that selection of the artwork that goes into our city. So this would be in addition to that. And as I say, it's an awful lot of money, and I really don't think we can put this cost onto our ratepayers.
Thank you. Councillor Schofield, did you want to speak?
Look, I do agree with Councillor Henderson, and given in light the conversation around the chamber tonight on budgets, I just can't see where are we going to find the $70,000. As much as it's a good idea, I just wonder whether there's grant funding available for them to look at.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. When I was reading through this, I was very supportive of it. I like the concept. I think it provides historical and heritage context to the majority of people within Victor Harbour. I also have a lot of concerns about the amount of money required, and I'm happy to look at some reduced funding if they can get granting and other things or other arrangements, but out of next year's budget discussions, not for now.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Kemp and Councillor Karimba.
Thanks, Mayor. More of a question to start with, again, for clarity. If we went into partnership on this unsolicited proposal, would then the cost become a capital because we have ownership of it as well? Would that be a more palatable way of doing this project if we had that arrangement? If not, because it's an operating cost, which I won't support. But again, if it's something the Arts and Culture Advisory Group thinks is a great opportunity and it goes into 24-25 year as a capital cost, I guess that may be more palatable for the chamber. Just wondering whether that can be done under the unsolicited proposal as a partnership arrangement.
Kelly.
Through the Mayor, there is potential for that type of arrangement and for capital to be considered, but on the basis of the request and the request for funds in order to build the artwork, it would be operating that would then later become under council's care and control. So from accounting standard point of view and the initial recognition of the funds, it would be operating first off.
Councillor Karimba? No. Any further discussion? Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I think just to echo some of the previous sentiment, as this has come through the chamber on previous occasions, it's something that council has supported. The concern, definitely as previously raised, is the allocation of the operating budget in the current financial year, noting again the comments that we've heard from our audit committee around the addition of projects throughout the year and a need to be restrained in that. I think the comment made by Councillor Burns is exceptional in terms of looking at this within our budget deliberations for next year, and maybe there is the opportunity to find maybe it's a lesser amount or definitely consider as part of those discussions. I know their intention was to deliver the project early next year in line with some milestones, but potentially if that's later next year, if that's part of that successful funding, then that might be also a win for them as well. So I think definitely good for council to consider, but at this stage, as discussed, unfortunately cannot support it.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Is there any further discussion? Do you want to close the debate, Councillor Henderson? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We have nothing from Corporate and Customer Services. We have item 12.1, which is under Environment and Infrastructure, around council supporting a coastal PhD scholarship program. I'm happy to do that recommendation 1 and 2 on block. Councillor Henderson moving that way. Councillor Burns seconding that. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, just briefly. I think this is a great initiative, and it's an opportunity for not only the student to have some hands-on working on our coast here in partnership with council, but it also will add to the data that we've already been collecting on our coastal processes, and will enhance our information, because at the moment we've only got baseline data with which to start, but we really need to know what is happening with sand movement, erosion, what's happening further out on our reefs and islands. So we totally understand sea movement, sand movement, ecosystems, etc. And this will add to all of that.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Burns, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Same sentiments exactly. I also think that it's, from a cost benefit point of view, it's a cheap investment to get critical data that we need. And compared to if we went out and got a external organisation and paid to get this done, we'd be looking at $200,000 to $300,000. So I think this amount of money is an excellent investment in giving us critical information we need for planning in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Karimba?
Just a question. So I do remember during the briefing session that we were going to have some sort of input into what things were going to be studied according to The presentation, is that still the case, or are we just handing over money and hoping for some figures?
Sorry, councillor, through the mayor, councillor Crember, I don't recall that council members would have a say on what would be studied. It will be the coastal area. So it will be what we need, essentially what we need to inform our future management of that area. I don't think it'll come to the council members to resolve what needs to be studied.
Okay, so we have no input? Okay.
Is there any further discussion? Those two recommendations, oh sorry, did you want to, there's not really any debate there, councillor Henderson. I'll put those two recommendations to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Road naming of Tuck Court. Recommendation is that council endorse the naming of a new unnamed road as part of the SA Ambulance Station development off Adelaide Road to Tuck Court. Moving that way, councillor Schofield, and seconding councillor Quinton. Either of you want to speak to that? Anyone want to speak to that? Councillor Karemba.
Thanks. I was actually at the Heritage Advisory Group meeting when we were talking about this, and I believe it was the ex-mayor that it sort of brought up the potential issue with the word tuck. So when it comes to the word, the whole thing, and I understand it is part of Tuck Reserve, but I'd just be, yeah, it was just something that was brought up in the advisory committee. I just thought it was kind of a little bit funny. That's all. Thanks.
Have you got a concern with the name, councillor Karemba? Do you want to let us know what your concern is? If there's a concern with the word tuck? Okay. Any further discussion? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. The cemeteries review, I will do that recommendation 1, 2 and 3 on block. They're pretty straightforward. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, councillor Schofield, and seconding councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to the recommendation? No?
Could, just
You
quickly.
could? Thank you.
Just to commend the good work that the volunteers and the council staff did on this. It was quite a comprehensive report and study, and I've been out to the cemetery having a look, and using that report to walk through really helped. And I think it aligns with growth and options, so I thought it was very good.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Subsidiary and representative reports. The first recommendation is that council endorse the Fleurieu Regional Waste Authority's financial performance report and first budget review for this year. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, and seconding that. Thank you, councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to that?
I'd do if I could. Thank you, Mayor. I was just concerned about the increase in costs again and the increase in asbestos claims. Everything else in there was okay, but I'm just concerned that it can be open-ended, and just wanting to get probably some reassurances as to some, are they on top of the claims and costs now?
Perhaps councillor Karemba, you're on the board there. Can you provide some reassurance to the chamber from that they've got the claims under control?
Unfortunately, that is all in confidence, so I'm not able to talk to that. I would love to tell you yes or no, but as I said, it's in confidence, so I can't really get too much into that. I will say that they are doing the best they can with everything else to maintain the budget. But, you know, there's been a large increase in costs in fuel, machinery, wages. So, yeah, unfortunately, it just is what it is.
The CEO was saying that she may be able to give us a confidential update later on when we go into confidence.
But I did provide one to members last week on Friday.
Any further discussion in relation to that recommendation? I'll put it to the floor then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We might have a break for 5 minutes if you don't mind. We don't have any matters for urgency. We don't have any questions on notice. So when we come back from the break, we'll go to questions without notice and then motions on notice. So I'll see you back here at 8:10. Thank you. I think we should all come back together. As I said, there's no questions on notice. Are there any questions without notice? Can the gallery please be quiet so that we can concentrate? Question? Yep, you have a question without notice, and Stuart Burns has a question without notice, and so does Councillor Quinton. I think, Stuart, you were first, then Carlos, then you. Yep.
I just wanted to ask if we elected members could be provided with a breakdown of the monies that have been spent for the Christmas decorations. I understand we budgeted about $100,000 for it, and I'd like to actually see how that was spent. I was just concerned driving around Victor. I counted 3 small Christmas trees, 6 wreaths on light poles, and 4 red ribbons. That's all. So there must be more somewhere.
I think that there's a few more Christmas trees. There's lots of lights up there, and certainly the community feedback that I've had back, the emails that people have been saying, why have you waited so long? They're really pleased. They look beautiful.
Better than previous, but a lot of those lights and things were purchased previously. I'm looking at a breakdown.
I'm sure that
would be great.
I'm sure we can get that. Thank you. Councillor Quinton, you've got a question? Sorry, Councillor Koremba.
Yes, so my question is there any possible legal consequences to council for refusing to allow a business to sell products, but because of the fact that a major sponsor also sells a similar product at a festival on council land? Could it be a breach of law under the Competition and Consumer Act of 2010 of restriction of fair trade?
You might need to be a bit more specific.
This was brought to me by a constituent that applied for a permit to sell some goods at the up-and-coming New Year's Eve event, and it was refused. He believes it was refused on the basis that the major sponsor is selling the same goods, and he was questioning, and the only reason he was questioning is he's a law student, is this in breach of the law under the Competition and Consumer Act of 2010 of restriction of fair trade?
We'll take that on notice and have a look at that. Thank you. Councillor Quinton, you've got a question?
Just following on from public transport and better transport options. The question is why ride-sharing companies are currently unable to operate in Victor Harbour, and I understand the gist of it, being a non-metropolitan area. Yeah. So the follow-up question is, how can this be changed to enable this to occur in Victor Harbour? And then the third part of it is, what knock-on effects would be envisaged?
Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of discussions with David Basham about this because it's a state government issue, state government laws. Apparently, from what I understand, if we get Uber or those sorts of things down here, then that actually impacts, because regional communities have different car registration licenses, which are cheaper. So it'll impact on everybody's car registration because they have to make them then the same as the city car registration.
Yeah. So I'm happy to. I just would like a proper written response if that's all right, because from what I understand as well is our public transport suffers not being part of the metropolitan area, and we end up, say for example, it costs $20 to get a bus from Goolwa to Victor, whereas if we were part of the metropolitan area, it would actually be a lot cheaper. So I'd like to know what the breakdown would be in terms of cost of car registration increasing, but how would public transport become more available and cheaper, and better options for after hours transport as well?
Yep, I'll see who would be doing that. Would that be? Yeah, we'll look into it a bit more. We'll follow that up. Any other questions without notice? No, we move on to motions without notice, or motions on notice rather. And the 18.1 is motion on notice amendment to Code of Practice for Meeting Procedures. Councillor Koremba.
Yes, Mayor, I'd just like to state that these were three separate motions, so I'd like to talk to them and have them individually voted on. That's how they were presented. Is that's correct?
That is correct. We're
Okay.
going to the first motion in relation to acknowledgement of country.
Okay, I move that the acknowledgement of country preamble is removed from the obligatory recital at all ordinary and special council meetings, workshops, briefing sessions, and council committee meetings. Yes. I'll just go into my commentary.
I'll just see whether you get a second first. Have you got a seconder for that? Councillor Burns, you're seconding that?
I would, because I was interested to actually understand why.
Okay, so Councillor Karemba.
Thank you. While support for the Yes campaign has gone to great lengths to limit the scope of the referendum results, it's become very clear that Australia did not say no to the voice to the Australians didn't just say no to the voice to Parliament on 14th of October. 60% of us said no to the social and racial division created in our community over many years. This division has deliberately and methodically created by casting today's Indigenous people as victims of a great injustice who therefore merit special laws, exclusive race-based rights, an expensive reconciliation process seemingly without end, and perpetual acknowledgements of apologies also without end. The most glaring manifestation of this deliberate division is the perpetual grievance or the so-called acknowledgement of country. This practice does absolutely nothing whatsoever to address the genuine Indigenous and economic and social disadvantages, nor does it undo or address any injustice committed against Indigenous Australians in the past. It provides nothing more than a lazy, effortless way for some people to signal virtue they generally do not possess. It's a tick and flick exercise that, despite presentations otherwise, it's disrespectful to Indigenous Australians and also which denies the citizenship sovereignty of all of us who share this equally regardless of race. I'm not the one calling it disrespectful. That is what some of the Ramangiri elders have called it, speaking to myself and Councillor Burns earlier on in our term. They expressed their disapproval of the overuse of acknowledgement of country and they want to be seen as equals. It's become largely meaningless for its constant repetition and ubiquity. The people of Victor Harbor rejected the racial division and exclusive race-based privilege presented by the voice to Parliament even more emphatically than the rest of Australia. Victor Harbor, the Victor Harbor no vote was 64%, and the pre-polling booth in Victor Harbor, the no vote was even higher at 72%. The results being higher than the national result and even higher than the South Australian result. Our Indigenous residents are not, as many may have you believe otherwise, disadvantaged compared to the average Victor Harbor resident, and these are the people we represent in this area. According to the most recent census, an average of their incomes are about 30% higher than the median Victor Harbor household income, despite being much younger. The actual median age for local Indigenous residents is only 20, and the average age for all people in Victor Harbor is closer to 60. So I'm calling to an end for these tokenistic. I'm calling to an end for this tokenistic, meaningless acknowledgements of country at the beginning of every council meeting, because I firmly of the opinion the majority of ratepayers and who we represent, including Indigenous ratepayers and residents, no longer want them. They want to be seen as equals and all having a connection to this great country we call Australia. We have an opportunity here to join others, forward-thinking, inclusive councils who have done the bidding of the residents and ratepayers, as we all actually meant to be doing. Thank you.
Councillor Burns, excuse me. If you clap again, I'll ask you to leave. You are not an audience. You are a gallery. Councillor Burns, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Now that I've heard Councillor Karemba's argument to his motion, I just want to mention a couple of things. I don't think anyone's not acknowledging the spiritual or historical connection of the Aboriginal culture to the land and waters and so forth. I do know that a number of the Ramajura elders and people in the community feel that welcome acknowledgement of country is overused and is concerning. I was talking to a number of people in the community about this. I believe Councillor Klemp has a variation that I would like him actually to put up to this, because I actually think that may address everyone's concerns on this. So.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Henderson, and then Councillor Schofield, and then Councillor Schiller?
Well, to begin with, I totally disagree with everything Councillor Kwaremba has said. I think this motion is totally disrespectful. It's not a motherhood statement. We acknowledge the First Nations people who have had a spiritual and cultural connection to this land for 60,000 years. That's what we do. But when we do it, we say it with sincerity. And I agree when it's not said with sincerity, and that are people in this chamber who have said the acknowledgement without sincerity and hurt First Nations people because of that. We have a reconciliation and action plan, and this is absolutely counter to that. The only other thing I want to say is that I think this motion and the next motion comes from a place of bigotry and racism, and I will not support either of them.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Schofield.
I have a great respect for the First Nations people, the Ramajuri, Narrandjeri, and the other tribes. I've lived with you, and I understand some of the issues and many of the issues you have. The feedback that I'm getting, and I also feel myself, that if I attend 5 or 6 meetings in this building, I hear that every time. People in our town, and not only in our town, are saying it is being overdone. It is no longer said with the respect that it deserves. I think we need to really have another thought on how we word this so we are inclusive, that every nation, every culture is treated exactly the same. So at this moment, I am a little unsure which way I'll vote, because I have the respect for you, but I have the respect for everybody else as well. And I'm listening to what my community is saying and feel that because the acknowledgement is spoken so many times, I must admit I tend to turn off, and I think other people do as well. And that's not what this is about.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Schiller.
I think that the acknowledgement of country serves a great purpose. My first point is it's an acknowledgement of country. It's not a welcome to country. So we're coming from this perspective of acknowledging First Nations people rather than us being welcome to their country. I think that's a big distinction between those two statements that are made. I also think that we have a huge history with First Nations, Aboriginals in this council area, as well as our other council areas around us. I think that the acknowledgement of country provides both Australians and First Nation Australians a sense of pride about their culture, their history, and I think just that component in itself warrants its use to have a positive spin rather than the negativity that can occur at times. So that's all I'd like to say.
Councillor Quinton?
100% won't be supporting this motion. It's all about acknowledgement and respect. If there is any issues that the Indigenous community have with the acknowledgement, I'd like to hear it from them directly. And secondly, regarding the referendum and this motion, politics, very separate, and we should try and keep the politics out of the room. And just because the referendum didn't go down doesn't mean we're all going to start voting for Pauline Hanson. So I'd make sure that we, keep a very clear distinction here.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Can I have leave of the meeting to make a personal explanation, to say something? Thank you. For me, personally, acknowledging our First Nations has got nothing to do with the Voice to Parliament referendum, to start off with. As a council, we already have our Indigenous voices that we listen to when we need advice around Indigenous issues. They are the Narrandjeri Aboriginal Corporation, the Rabinjeri Association and MEPAC, and we listen to those voices quite often when we need to. Acknowledging country is an acknowledgement that for over thousands of years, our First Nations people, the Rabinjeri and the Narrandjeri people, have been living on this land we now call home. They were the first Australian artists, the first teachers, the first peacemakers. They were the first people here, and they did not cede their sovereignty. We came and they made us welcome. Acknowledging country is an opportunity for us to recognise that while our European history is very young and is a great European history and not so great European history, it is young, but our Australian history stretches over millennium, stretches over thousands of years, thousands of generations of Aboriginal people. And I think acknowledging that just reminds us of where we are and who we are. Whatever way this vote goes tonight, I will continue to acknowledge the First Nations people of this country at council meetings when I'm chairing them, as it's my prerogative. I know that our staff will continue to do that, because it's in the reconciliation plan, and what the staff do and what elected members do are quite different. So I will continue to acknowledge the First Nations people of this country and the long history they have with the land and the waters. I'll continue to give my utmost respect to the elders of the past who have taught the elders of the present. And I know we have some amazing upcoming young Indigenous people in our community that will be leaders and elders going forward into the future. And I will recognise, as I say my acknowledgement of country, that we have hurt our Indigenous brothers and sisters in lots of ways. And reconciliation is about bridging that gap and walking together hand in hand. But we need to acknowledge what country we are now living on. Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. Listening to the debates and various things, and I think what comes to mind is part of our reconciliation with the Aboriginal people. Again, we're a multicultural country. I'm just wondering, if people talk about racism and bigotry because we don't support this motion, or we do support it, then if we don't recognise our other cultures in this country, are we racist and bigots as well? So I think, is there a possibility that I would like to adjourn this motion to a workshop to be brought back to the February meeting to look at and review the acknowledgement to country, to look at a statement that's all inclusive of all cultures, including the Aboriginal people, as we are one. And that's what part of our national anthem is about. We are one, and we should move together as one. And I think that would be a part of the reconciliation process, that the Aboriginal people will see that we're acknowledging other cultures as well, and keeping their key statements in the acknowledgement to identify them.
So
To me, that is more of a process of going forward of reconciliation and being totally inclusive of all our cultures who makes this country what it is. But we're not forgetting the Aboriginal people. So I like to move that adjournment motion.
Adjournment motion, formal motion to adjourn. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Burns. All those in favour of adjourning? Those against? That's lost. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I'm not going to go into too many of the points that have been well covered around the chamber, and I do respect the matter before, but I think I see the point Councillor Krember's trying to make and the correlation drawn with the vote. But I guess from my perspective, I don't see how, I don't agree that a national vote to change the Australian Constitution relates to the Victor Harbor Council's meeting procedures. It's a gap a bit too far for me. You know, I think I was maybe one at the time, but understand that in 1999 we had a referendum to become a republic. Now that also lost, but we're not here voting to sing God Save the King before each of our meetings. So I see the point trying to be made. I don't agree with the point though, and a lot of the other reasons raised in the chamber as well, and I won't be supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie, do you want to join in the debate?
Nothing so much more to add. Just I see the point Councillor Karemba is making about acknowledging all cultures and backgrounds and histories, but I do understand the significance of the acknowledgement of country and the history of Australia around that. So I do feel as it is important to keep that within our meeting procedures.
Thank you. I think everybody's spoken. Councillor Karemba, would you like to close the debate?
Yes, I'd just like to add a few things.
You can't add anything in closing the debate. You can only talk about what has been discussed in the
Okay, so talking about what has been discussed, I'd like to, I guess, suggest to Councillor Quinton that instead of having elders come to you to tell you what they want, maybe go out and see them like myself and Councillor Burns did in our first couple of months. That'd just be a suggestion that I would say, is to really understand what they want. In regards to Mayor, you were saying about hurting our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. Well, I would argue that what we are doing by separating them and not bringing them on board with everybody else is actually hurting them more. We have seen more division in this country, and we've spent nearly $500 million to get there, when Aboriginal people are suffering from great injustices in remote communities. But so are Australians. There's a lot of Australians that feel the same pain. So I think the needs and necessities of people should be based on what they actually need, not on the colour of their skin. I guess this isn't about being racist, as Councillor Henderson, and it's more about making sure that we don't treat people like victims, because when we treat them like victims, we stop them from actually moving forward themselves. We should be about giving a hand up, not a hand out. And I think that there are a lot of great Aboriginal people in the community that, as I said, when I've spoken to them, and I've spoken to a lot of elders from a lot of different places, they want to be treated the same. In fact, one of the things that was brought up to me, and I didn't know this, is they don't want to be called First Nations people, at least the ones I've spoken to. They want to be called Aboriginals. Their mob, my mob. Until we start actually stop sugarcoating what's going on in this country, we will always have people who are in adverse poverty, and we need to treat everybody based on their needs, not their race. So I hope that this motion is supported. It doesn't come from a point of disrespect. It actually comes from a point of respect to say, you are like us. Let's all move forward together. We cannot fix the past, but we can definitely make a better future for every Australian in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. I now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That is lost. Thank you.
I call a division.
All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Burns. Councillor Kemp. Councillor Corimba and Councillor Schofield. Those against, Councillor Mann, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schiller and Councillor Henderson. That motion is lost. Councillor Corimba, you have a second motion recommendation there?
Yes, I move that the diversity commitment preamble is removed from the obligatory recital at all ordinary and special council meetings, workshops, briefing sessions and council committee meetings.
Would you like to, do you have a seconder for that?
Because I want to talk to it as well.
Councillor Corimba, would you like to talk to your motion?
Thank you. I've put forward this motion as a result of what I can only describe as a lacklustre response regarding a question that had been put to me by a resident prior to the last council meeting. I'll remind the chamber that the question was about the lack of diversity in the senior management team, and the reply from the CEO was, and I quote, "Women are awesome." Now, I do not believe that anybody in this chamber or community for that matter would argue the point. In fact, I believe that not only are women, but men, children can also be awesome. But my question was not about how awesome anyone is. It was simply asking why there is a lack of diversity in the senior management team, considering that we preach the preamble that the City of Victor Harbor is committed to diversity, equity and inclusion. Now, since that question was asked and it was put in the print local newspaper, there has been a pile-on through social media, instigated, I believe, by the Mayor, including her own personal LinkedIn page, where she stated that her workplace was misogynistic. I think the Mayor would do well to look up the definition of misogyny. Being asked difficult questions about how we conduct our business does not come under that banner of misogyny, but it does fall under the banner of good governance, which is exactly what we're meant to be doing here, hence why I asked the question. Let me make myself perfectly clear. I will never back down from asking the questions that need to be asked, those questions that are asked of me as an elected member, even if some may not like to hear them. This is part of my role as an elected member, and I will do this no matter how much you try and shut me down. The chamber has been dysfunctional for a very long time, and in fact, I've recently spoke to an elected member back in 2006 that has said as much. Well, I'm here to tell you that this has to come to an end, as it does not benefit the community. Now, getting back to the reason for the motion, and to quote a Ramangiri elder, actions for me are more important than words. So bearing that in mind, I'm putting this motion forward to send a clear message to the administration and elected members that until these actions are reflective of its words, we should not pretend to do so. Thank you.
Councillor Burns, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I probably have a slightly different take on this. I understand why it's included. Where I struggled when it was first put in by administration in our first meeting before we actually voted on it, I had concerns about, because it's all covered under Australian legislation. We have to comply with it by law, so why do we need to reiterate it again when we're bound by law to follow it, to do all this? That's the bit that I struggle with. To me, it's reiterating, saying we drive on the left or something else. It just doesn't make sense. It should be through our actions, not saying we're going to do this. It should be every day of our activity in the community, in council. This should be, it's part of HR policies. It's not something that we have to say a statement and then do nothing. Again, it comes back to the Australian law says that we're required to do all this. So I struggle a little bit. I understand it's there, and if the majority of the chamber want to retain it, it's fine. I just think that we're, already bound legally to do this. That's all.
Thank you. Any other discussion from any other elected members? Councillor Schiller?
One of the reasons that the diversity commitment is so important is that diversity, equity and inclusion aren't naturally spread throughout our society and our council decisions at the moment. By having a diversity commitment there, every time we walk into the chamber, we have to think about those who may not be sitting here at the table. I happen to be probably one of the people that you would look at being reasonably diverse in the fact that I have a disability. I'm also a woman with a disability, so I've got a combination happening there. And every decision we make has to include other parties that we are not sitting here at the table. That's looking at other races, looking at people with different genders and so forth. And at the moment, we all come to the table with our own sort of life experience sitting there. And when we make our decision, we base a lot of it on our own life experience. And if we have more diversity, inclusion, not just in the chamber itself, but also in our planning process, in our policies, everywhere in council it has to happen. And so by stating this statement, every time we walk into the chamber, we can sit there and think, well, today, are we making a decision based on diversity, equity and inclusion? I've had to come to this chamber with people not expecting me to be able to fulfil my role as a councillor, and that was a preconceived idea prior to me becoming a councillor. But I think if you look at the motions that I brought to council myself this year, I've brought a different perspective to council when I campaigned on that different perspective. So to get more diversity into our chamber, our staff, everywhere within our society is important. So I stand by the fact that the diversity commitment pricks your mind every time it's said to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Is there anybody else that would like to join in the debate? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, it's interesting acknowledgement. I mean, we could have 50 acknowledgements if we really want to put our heads down and come up with things, and they're all great and they're all good and they're all relevant to what we do. But we don't do that because it's too much time consuming. I mean, why make statements that we already do? You know, as Councillor Byrne said, we've got legislation. I understand Councillor Schiller where she's coming from with the fact that she's made a lot of changes to us in this chamber because of her presence and what she's been saying. So in my mind, I don't feel that we need to say it. The other side of it as well, that if we're making commitment statements like this and we're not following them, are we exposing ourselves to something in the future? Are we going to put ourselves into some type of situation where, we litigation, defamation or racism or whatever you want to call it, these things, because it talks about sexuality, it talks about everything. So we've got to be mindful that when we make commitments and we don't follow through, and I guess you could say now, if we actually went around the room, we would say that we are not committing to a lot of these things already in our chamber, in our decision making, because we don't have disability access to the upper cinema, for example. So we're not inclusive in that area. There are a lot of problems with making commitments. And I think by removing it, it doesn't mean that we don't forget it. It's quite live. It's a living thing in our chamber. It's a living thing with administration because they have to comply, they have to implement it, and they make sure that we understand it as well as decision makers, that we have to be understanding of this equal opportunities, all that comes around it. So having it in there, I don't think it serves a purpose because we know it already. We are very, use the term, awesome chamber. We're an awesome council. So awesome people do the right thing. They know about it, they talk about it, and they actually show it through action. You don't need statements. like this to do it. So in that context, people say, well, what about the service acknowledgement? Get rid of that. Well, yeah, you could get rid of that, but that acknowledgement is about people who gave the ultimate sacrifice. So we recognise them. So I guess, again, I just want to say that, being there, I'm really not fussed if it's in there or not, but really I don't see the purpose of it because we actually know it and we do it and we go about it.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Any further discussion in relation to the diversity commitment preamble? Councillor Karimba, do you want to close the debate?
Thank you. As much as this is going to be hard for some people to hear, I'm going to call out the rank hypocrisy in this chamber. Not only earlier before, we had a man come here with a disability who is
Councillor
in the...
Karimba, you're closing the debate. You're not bringing in new information.
Okay.
So please keep your comments to what the discussion has been.
Okay, so the discussion is about diversity, inclusivity and equity, correct? Is that's the discussion? I just want to be clear because that's what the motion.
It's your motion.
That's
Councillor
right. So I'm
Karimba.
just wondering why you're interjecting when I'm trying to make a point about how we say things, but when it actually comes to putting the metal to the pedal, or the pedal to the metal, I should say, we're very selective about how we do these things. So either we do them all, as Councillor Kemp said, or we will find ourselves in a position where we may be held liable, or we don't. But I don't think that a HR policy is something we should have to read out at the beginning of every meeting. We should just do it and to have it shoved down our throats every single time. And I acknowledge, Councillor Sheila, you're doing a fantastic job considering. But we should also take into consideration that there are people in the community that look at these things and ask whether we are actually following what we say. That was my whole point. And everybody's just gone off on a tangent. So, I'd just like to see that we actually followed through with some of the things we said.
Thank you. That's the debate closed. I now put the motion to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That motion is lost. You want a division, Councillor Burns? All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Burns, Councillor Kemp and Councillor Karimba. Those against? Councillor Mann, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. That motion is lost. And you had a third motion.
Yes. Third motion, the City of Victor Harbor place the above mentioned recitals before the residents of Victor Harbor for their approval by way of consultation, asking them to retain, remove, modify by addition or removal of wording.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Burns. Please, Councillor Karimba.
I think basically this speaks for itself. I think we need to go out to the community, seeing as we're meant to be representing them. I guess the question also is the diversity and equity statement that was, and this is a question for the CEO, but was that actually put in by administration or was that actually presented by elected members and voted on?
It was approved by elected members and then I think it was amended by Stuart Burns, who added another word to it to be more. Yep, and then then you added something else to it and then we approved that.
All right, so and moving on, I think it's just important that we actually consult with our community who we are meant to be representing about what they think and feel about these preambles. Thank you.
Councillor Burns, did you want to speak to that?
I'm always supportive of going back to our residents on major things, and with this, because there's been a lot of people in the community both ways, I think it would be actually good for us to actually not just hear what we think, but actually what the community thinks about this. Now, we may be pleasantly surprised and they want to leave it as it is, but I think they should at least have some input as well.
Thank you. Councillor Mann? And then Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, just quickly to add, we are voted in to make decisions for the community. Yes, we do consult quite extensively on a number of significant projects, policies. We saw tonight the results of the consultation around the bylaws and the significance of that. I don't think the current recommendation is something of a significance enough to go out on that community consultation, and I'm very satisfied with it being as the vote of the elected members, the people who have been elected by the community to make decisions for our community. And if someone voted for me and didn't like that, how I voted in the scheme of my service with this motion or any other, then that's something for them to consider when it comes to next time, if there's that next time. But I'm happy not to support this one.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
Similar to Braden, but also this is about our meeting procedure and how we go about our formal council meeting. And I wouldn't expect that we would be going out to adjust other parts of our meeting procedure, agendas, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. In principle, yes, I do support this because I think one of the interesting things about this motion about going out to consultation on those acknowledgements, yes, we do make decisions on behalf of the community. That's what we're here for. Sometimes being wise is when to go out to the community and ask the question as well, and that is good decision making. That's what we're here for. Because these items are so emotional, very emotive, and there is a division in the community about whether we have them or not have them, I think it's a good opportunity to, these types of things, I think it's wise for a chamber to say, what does the community think about? What do they want to hear or want to see from us as decision makers about how we do acknowledgements and for the benefits of the community? So I think this is a community issue, and I think it needs the community to have some feedback to us as elected members.
Anybody else want to speak? With the leave of the meeting, do you mind if I say a few words? Can you put your hand up if that's all right? Yeah, thank you. I think that the more time we spend navel gazing, for want of a better word, talking about things internally, the less time we're actually focusing on what our community needs are. And we've got community that have got great needs. This is about how we behave and how we interact as elected members. It's about what we listen to, about how we reflect and how we behave in the chamber. It should be us making these decisions. We were voted on because of our values, because of our differences, because of the different communities that we interact with. And we need to take that into account when we're debating things in the chamber, and especially when we're talking about things and debating things that affect us. These preambles affect us. They're a reflection of our values, our integrities, what we do as a chamber. And I don't think that we need to go out to a community consultation to reflect why we're here. Councillor Karemba, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you. I'd just like to say that the only reason that I would see that anybody would not support this is because in actual fact you are probably concerned about what the broader community think of how this council conducts itself. We talk about, you just talked about how we conduct ourselves between members, and yet some of the toxic relationships that are present in this chamber, most people don't know. So I think it's important that we actually talk to the community, and if we're not going to go out to talk to the community, then I can only surmise bring on the election in 3 years' time, and then we will decide whether these things are important to the community or not. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes the debate, and I'll now put the motion to the floor. Those in favour? Those against?
I call a division.
Councillor Karemba has called a division. Those in favour, please stand. Councillor Burns, Councillor Kemp, Councillor Karemba, got it all down there. Those against, Councillor Mann, Councillor McKenzie, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Henderson and Councillor Schofield. That motion is lost. We now move to item 20.1, which is, sorry, are there any motions without notice? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move that the City of Victor Harbor invites Mr Mike Willett, the town crier, to participate in the Australian Day festivities in 2024.
I think we've already done that. There's been a meeting with him, I understand, and not with Mike yet. You've discussed it with him? Oh, you did, okay. I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I thought that I was told that there was already a discussion underway and that it would be. Do I have a seconder for your motion? Councillor Karemba, thank you. Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you. Again, Mr Willett, or the town crier, used to be participating in the Australia Day Awards for many years. Then he stopped and he didn't know why. There was this whole new guidelines that didn't get up. Again, we're in a bit of abeyance at the moment as to how the town crier operates off the old system. We need to change that and improve it. Again, I think this will be just again another celebration of a part of a culture, which is our European culture from England that came out, but it's not about Invasion Day. If people think that's Australia Day is about, they're on the wrong planet in my mind, because it's about celebration of a country, a birth of a country, with all the different cultures that come here to make this country what it is. And that's what I see Australia Day is about. It's all being inclusive of all cultures. And so certainly I think it'll be part of the great festivities with the Aboriginal people doing their participation and town crier. And certainly I would imagine if a Lithuanian person came and asked, can I do a celebrational thing? I think, why not? They're Australians. So I think there's an opportunity that we should be open about how we celebrate our Australia Day. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Who seconded that? Do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to reiterate that if the town crier is not invited to partake in Australia Day, that would be an absolute travesty, and that would actually be an indicative motion by this council to show how disconnected they are from the majority of the people that live here. So I would definitely support this motion. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak to this? I'll put it to those in favour. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move, are there any other motions without notice? Now move to confidential items. And the first item, which is number 20, the first recommendation is to go into confidence because the item is commercial information of a confidential nature, the disclosure of which would reasonably expected to prejudice the commercial position of the corporation who supplied the information. Moving that way, Councillor Burns, seconding that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Schofield. All those in favour? Councillor Henderson, you in favour of going into confidence? Thank you. That's carried.